Is it all set? Is it rolling? Is it going? Yeah. What's up, everybody? It's the Ripple Effect podcast.
You know you're rusty.
I know. I've never done the introduction, though. I'm always just kind of nodding.
I'm just going to share let them know. I'm just going to share the.
All right. I'm going to let you know that Rick is just sharing the link out on his Facebook and his Twitter here. I'm guessing that this is live. You're watching the Ripple Effect podcast. I'm Dave. Rick is not on screen right now, so this is our 100th episode, and these headphones are echoing in my ear, so I'm gonna pull them off, completely off. You need to hire a producer and a director, and then you'll be all set. Once you hit it bigger. Rick is tweeting out now, we are live. It looks like he capitalized the word live. And my babbling is proof that we're live. Is it working? All right. Unbelievable.
I wonder if I go on my phone if I can see this. Like if I literally, I think the camera will. Okay, awesome, man.
All right.
This is as unprofessional as possible. You know, it's funny.
All right. Cheers. We got to
cheers,
cheer.
man. Cheers to 100th episode.
100th episode.
This is crazy.
It's actually my 4th episode and your 100th episode.
It's crazy because, you know, like I've tweeted and I've said on our Facebook page how, like, not that long ago, it seems like this was just a idea that I got. And I'm always like that. Well, I'm not always, but this time I was like that annoying friend who gets into something and then gets overly excited and has to talk about every time I'm with people.
They make a ton of jokes about people with podcasts anyway. So like even Family Guy's done a thing about it. So you're that
everybody
guy.
has a podcast and stuff like that. Yeah, that's true. You know what? Let me I'll text my wife and make sure that good luck streaming live in. Let me see. Check out the live stream and let me know if you can hear us loud and clear. But yeah, I basically try to find a reason to talk about it every time I was around people. So I'd be at work and it'd be like people would just say something that just skimmed a topic that was like somewhat like I could just some way find a sneaky way of just like, I do a podcast. You know, it's like sometimes I found myself, I'm like, dude, I just randomly brought it up. But I think when you do something, you get excited.
Did you say podcast?
Yeah.
No, I didn't. Well, funny you mention it.
But it was exciting. I mean, to think that a year ago, and I remember when we first, and I know you said that you didn't listen to the first couple episodes, or you have, but
I did. I went back and I did go, not very recently, but I recently went back and listened to the first episode. And I was cracking up at how
bad it was.
I mean, I thought it was bad. I did, but it's amazing to me. Like, and this is not
somebody's watching because I see viewers go up. Yeah.
This is something that I haven't talked to you about, but I had never intended to follow through with this with you.
How dare you?
My feeling was, and this has worked exactly how I kind of envisioned it was. You just, like you said, you would bring it up all the time and you just wanted to get this thing going. I thought, man, we have great conversations like you always talk about. And I said to myself, all right, I'll do this. And we'll hit a point where I'll fade out of here. And you could have done this on your own from day one. That's what I believe. But I figured I would help you get it rolling. And then once I wasn't needed in your mind, then you'd be all set.
Yeah, but it wasn't that you weren't needed. It got to the point where, because you obviously you work a lot of hours, you're always busy, and I work a lot of hours. So we just had a lot of stuff that it was hard to schedule around. So to find time around scheduling around my schedule, your schedule, and the guest's schedule, it got to the point where it got so hard. But I was okay with it until you stopped showing up to shows. That's what kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Because what would end up happening was that I would find some link between all our schedules. Like, so I'd be like, okay, this day Dave's free, I'm free, the guest is free, and then last second you're like, oh, I don't think I'm gonna make it.
I'd become unfree though, especially especially the last year. Things have.
You might want to talk in the microphone. Yeah, I know you're rusty.
I'm just wandering around. Especially in the last year, my life has been super busy with work and things like that, where I I'll work overtime or whatever the case may be, and I hate to not show up if I say I'm going to be there. I'd hate to commit something and then have to change my change things around as a result of that. So that's really honestly the episode that to me blew my mind was the Greg Smith episode, Dr. Greg Smith. That was to me the moment I was sitting there watching, like I felt like I could sneak out of the room and not even be there. I don't even think I said a word or two during that whole podcast. You totally carried that whole thing. And he was a fantastic guest, and you handled that so perfectly. I was like, this is the one where I can.
But that was an early show. I mean, I think that, you know what's funny?
It was.
I think like Greg Smith and Dr. Brzezinski, I think those were two really good shows because it was topics that I felt comfortable talking about because I was really into. And talking about just the history of medicine. Both me and you are both into nutrition and diet, so it's something that I was into even before I really got into alternative media and geopolitics and history. One thing I've always been into, I was always like playing basketball and trying to push myself to the max physically and try to figure out the healthiest way of living. Which was really funny because it almost seems like my lifestyles contradicted themselves, because in one aspect I was known as being the kid who loved to go out drinking, have a good time, making sure everybody's having a good time. So I'd buy rounds of shot for everybody, not because I was trying to get people drunk, but because I wanted everybody to have fun. And then another aspect during the day, I was that dude who's like, you should eat organic, you should take vitamins, So it's just like they kind of contradict. But
but it's work hard, play hard. That's a great philosophy of life. You know what I mean?
No, you're right.
When the time to work comes, you put it down and get it done, and then when it's time to have fun, you got to cut loose too.
And that's kind of the way I looked at it. I kind of looked at it as the therapy. Like I tell my wife now about smoking cigars. She's like, you get mad when I buy stuff that's not organic. You always on top of that. If she buys any cleaning supplies, I want to buy stuff that's safe, especially now that she's pregnant. It's safe for her to breathe in or whatever, and just everything. If it's sunscreen for the kid, all that stuff. And then she's like, and then you go out on the porch and smoke cigars. And I'm like, yeah, but I think the mental therapy I get from that, like the reflecting, as you've hung out with us when we smoke cigars, just as sitting back, reflecting, talking, like slowing down for a second, because if not, then you're running around. I think if that is more beneficial than any negative health benefits I might get from the actual smoke. Plus, you're not inhaling it, And I had Delicia Silva, who was one of the podcast guests, who was the cigar expert.
Vixen?
The allegedly very attractive cigar vixen.
What do you mean allegedly?
Allegedly. I'm married. I have to say allegedly. So
you should say, some may say,
most may say, most would say that she's very attractive. But the thing is, what she says,
she had fun with that though. See, there's a bunch of things that I've been thinking about. I'll let you finish your thought, and then I'll get into that. But,
well, I was just going to say, she's one of those believers that cigars are very, like, the negative effects on your health are very minimal. She believes, she smokes every day. I mean, literally smokes every day. And she's a health freak. She eats good, eats organic. She goes to the gym. She stays in shape. So it's pretty amazing that she doesn't really feel any real effects of smoking every day. But there is something to say about with cigarettes. And I compare it to food. Like, you could buy McDonald's where there's additives and there's things like that. Or you can buy a hamburger that's organic, grass fed, and it's like the McDonald's has a bunch of stuff in there that the hamburger itself might not be what's bad for you. It's all that other shit. Where same thing with cigars and cigarettes. Like, cigars always gets lumped in with cigarettes, but cigars, it literally is just dried leaf, where a cigarette has all these fillers, all these additives, all the it's literally the processed food of smoking. Like, it's not the same as pipe smoking or cigar smoking, where it's just the tobacco itself. And there's some health benefits to nicotine, like it sparks creativity. There's a lot of people, I forget which author and filmmaker, I think one author and one filmmaker, very well known, but I can't come up with the name at the moment, which will be more and more frequent as I keep drinking. But they were saying how once they quit smoking, they had a real hard time sparking creativity and imagination. And it seems like there are some effects with that. with nicotine. But what were you gonna say?
No, I was just gonna say, I that's one of the episodes that I did. I gotta admit, I haven't watched every episode that you've done. I haven't watched every episode that you've done.
You haven't watched all 99?
No, I haven't watched the previous 99. But as I was reflecting on the fact that and it cracks me up too, because you write, you'll put out like we're doing, and it's not been we for a long, long time. But as I was reflecting on the shows that I have seen and my experience in working with you, I've always found that whatever the topic has been, the guests have always had a good time on your show. They've always seemed to me to be genuinely interested in coming back. There have been people on, and I'm sure as I say this, things are going to come to your head, where you've had guests on that were surprised at how much you knew about whatever it is you were talking about with them. And I'm sure most of the guests, a lot of the guests that you've had have been, they've done book promotions and things like that, where they'll sit with an interviewer who doesn't know shit about what they're interviewing about. And it's really kind of like they say a few words and then the guest has to carry the conversation. And I think it must be refreshing for them, because you don't pick guests based on them promoting something or anything other than it's something that you have a genuine interest in. And that definitely comes through in the shows that you've done.
Well, you brought up the Gregory A. Smith show. One thing that was really motivating, I guess personally motivating to want to keep this going, even when it got hard at points, to just find time, money, and effort to try to book guests and try to continuously get unique people on. He emailed me afterwards, and he wrote me, a decent, not a big email, but he wrote quite a few sentences about, I think we would call that a paragraph. He wrote me a paragraph about how he really appreciates what I'm doing, and how he thinks it's awesome what I'm doing, and to keep it up, and he'll help me any way he can. And when guests say that, Nancy Gabberty has said that.
I was going to mention something about that too.
Yeah, her and multiple guests. Rick Ross, when I had him, it's funny because a buddy just text messaged me, I think today, telling me that he saw the show with Rick Ross, and he's like,
that is definitely a guy who was blown away about how much.
Oh, you listened to that one, right?
Yeah, I did. And he's like, man, you did your research, and think about it. A lot of people don't really know the story,
Well, it makes it easy because I've only had a handful of people on that were suggested to come on, and I didn't choose to have them on because I was a fan. Very few out of 99 shows, but obviously a lot of them were me and you, and they weren't all guests. But out of all the shows, only a few of them were basically just somebody that was suggested, and because of that, most of the people I had on were people that I'm familiar with their work. I'm thinking of somebody now that was suggested, James Perloff. I'm looking at his book right now, Truth is a Lonely Warrior. I had him on. I got his book afterwards after he suggested and all that stuff. But and he ended up being an awesome guest too. But very few people were people that I wasn't familiar with the work, and I had to read into them or listen to past interviews and stuff like that. And so it made it easy because it was people that I already knew the work. The only thing that made it hard was not hard, but I just had to go back and get familiar with the work again. If I'm having a show, I want to make sure if I ask a question, it's not something stupid or whatever. And that was some of that. I'll tell you, the first time you weren't on a show, and I remember this because it was with
because I was so pissed at you.
I was probably upset, but
I kept looking out the window,
hoping that Dave would show up. Yeah, you're like a stepdad that never shows up.
Yeah. Tear rolls down your cheek.
I'm just on the sidewalk waiting for the car to show up.
Christmas, he promised.
But was with Truth Loaders. They were an alternative news channel that was really popular from the UK. And I had two guests on there. Male and female. Adam, and what was her name? They're both super nice. And it was the first show you weren't on, and I remember being super nervous because one thing, like, you've always kind of been known as being a smart guy. Like, anybody who meets you, one thing they're going to say is that, at least with my experience, it seems like you definitely come off as intelligent, well-spoken, all that stuff. I've always been super... Some would say, but I've always been super insecure with my intelligence or my ability to have intelligent conversations because I've never been a smart kid. I've never been... school, I I mean, I was in special ed at one time. You know, I was thrown in a vocational school because
See, but I think that I definitely think you're you're definitely one of the smartest guys I know.
I'm not smart.
No, you retain information better than anybody I know, and especially considering the volume of information you consume, it blows my mind. Like, I think I've watched 10% of the you know, the documentary links or whatever you send to me. You're like, oh, you got to check this out. You got to check this out. Like, I've watched 10% of that, and I'm 10 times smarter than any. Obviously, I'm not that smart if I can't talk to a microphone.
Do you want to tighten that up a little
you know
bit?
what? Maybe I'll just pull this off or something.
And
But
just hold it like
I don't watch
like Eddie Vedder.
I watch a small amount of what you sent to me, and I can't believe how much stuff you watch. So, like, you know, throw
Maybe-
away the old special ed shit and all that.
Yeah.
You know, that's like your brain worked differently than the average high school kid. And I think the problem, like with public education, is it teaches to the masses rather than individuals. And my daughter had an awesome experience in Hawaii. She lived there for 4 years, and she had some amazing educational experiences. And she's coming back. She's back in Massachusetts now, and she's going to be going to a public school for the first time in in 4 years. And I'm not worried about it because she's really adaptable, but it's going to be a different experience for her. And like you said, as you went through the grades, you know, all it takes is one teacher in a bad mood one day to kind of send you off on this tangent, and the next thing you know, you are classified or characterized as this type of student or that type of, this kid has behavioral issues. I had some experiences with school where I'd be in the school on a daily basis over a period of about 10 years. And in that time period, I saw the number, when I would come into the school, I'd see a couple kids going down to the nurse's office for medication. At the end of the 10-year period, that train of kids going down to the nurse's office for medication was gigantic. It was, 50, 60 kids compared to 2 from 2 years before. So it's very easy for, in the educational system, for somebody to be pigeonholed or sent down a track that they're really not. And, I hear you talk about it. You're, like I said, you're one of the most intelligent guys I know. And you do have this insecurity about it sometimes. And that's crazy to me,
Well,
because sometimes you know more about the topic you're talking about than the people you're talking about it with. So,
well, see, I don't, the thing is that I think what intelligence is, and this is where I guess I can see where it's one thing I'm good at. Like a lot of times, like we would joke around how I don't remember exact quotes. I don't remember exact things sometimes, but I remember what I learned from it. And,
right.
And
that's huge.
And yeah, that's huge. Because I think, like Daniele Vignelli would always say, like, the information is not important. Like, just knowing a bunch of information. That's one thing I loved about him, because he's a really smart guy, professor, all this stuff. And he was the first person that I heard, like, because we had Thaddeus Russell on, and Thaddeus Russell is a very smart guy, gets in these very intellectual debates with people. And actually, it's funny, him and Danielle are very close. So it's like, you look at somebody like that, I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could have that, and know all that information. Then I hear Danielle Vignelli, and he's like, that's bullshit. Like, it's like, what's important is how is this information important to me? Does it improve my life? Does it improve the way I look at something? Does it improve my understanding of something? If it's just information for the sake of information, like sometimes I'll get commenters on my show, on other shows, and they'll correct you on something.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's no big deal. Like, I mean, luckily I have a lot of really smart commenters who have really strong and really actually intelligent opinions on things. And those are the type of people that should also be starting podcasts, because I think the same way that, and one thing that, and I'm going to, this is so common of me to just jump from topic to topic, but well, I've done it for 100 episodes. Why not do it today? But the thing is that one thing I get a lot is how a lot of people, and actually I shouldn't say a lot, but for some reason, the last 3, 4 to 6 months, I've been getting a lot of emails about how people appreciate the fact that I'm a regular Joe who started this podcast, all based on this idea that I'm hoping to do something more fulfilling than what I was doing. And obviously, after having kids, that skyrocketed. But before, it was living this kind of unfulfilled life, really being interested in this research and all this stuff. And I was doing music, but music just took so long to release. And even when you get a message out on a song, some people might not even get the message. So you end up doing all this work and people don't even get it. And which I know for a fact, because there's bands like 1 Minute Silence. The singer was on my show, and he was really influential, because when I first got into them, I knew they're political, but I didn't get their songs. And then later, as I got older, I'm like, oh, that's what he means. Oh, that's what he meant. You know, and I liked them just because of the fact that I liked their music, not so much because I thought they were political. And so, and then I'm like, okay, well, music, I don't know, man. I feel like I could do something more. And then when I got into podcasts, one thing that I thought was fucking amazing, and I always bring this up because Michael Sandel, the Harvard professor, he teaches philosophy. He was one of the most influential people to me, because he just put information out for free. He did a whole semester, and apparently a lot of people have done this, but for some reason I've always been intrigued with philosophy. I think I was probably just looking up lectures or something on philosophy, learn a little more about specific philosophies, and he put his whole semester online, and I was like, this is crazy. I'm like, this is awesome. Like,
it's like
free.
Going to a Harvard, a Harvard class.
And then it hit me, like, that's what podcasts are. Podcasts are an opportunity to learn for free. And not just that, you get somebody like Dan Carlin. Like, there's a great podcast, I've sent it to you, with Dan Carlin and Sam Harris debating. And to be able to hear really smart people not just give a lecture, but actually have a conversation, and people pick each other's minds and ideas. Like, to me, that was so fascinating. And to be the fact that my drive to work from A to B could be a complete waste of time, but instead, like, I'm picking up a lot of this information, and people say, oh, wow, you retain all this information. A lot of it is, and people are like, I don't have time for that. I'm like, I'm using the time in the car, usefully.
Yeah.
And I made up that word, right? Usefully. Is that
usefully? That is a real word.
And and instead of just
usefully, I don't know. Actually, I'm gonna put that out.
That.
I'm not sure. Usefully.
For the record, we're not sure.
Usefully.
But I am a foreigner, so I have the right to make up words every once in a while. But yeah, so that was, to me, like, that was amazing. And I thought it was revolutionary. I thought this idea, that's why I was so excited about it. And I couldn't understand, like, I would try to get you into them, my buddy Eddie, my buddy, I think Kevin was excited about it. Like, oh, that'd be cool. You start a podcast. And he was a fan of them. But a lot of people were just like, I don't get it. My brother, for example, he's like, I don't get it. He's like, I'd rather listen to music. I'd rather listen to talk radio about sports, because WEI is really popular in Massachusetts. And I'm like, yeah, but you get to, like, there's podcasts on every topic, on history, on cars, on sports.
If you like it, there's a podcast about it.
Exactly.
Even like there are TV shows that do podcasts. I know I've listened to some of the Better Call Saul podcasts and things like that. But I remember when I was living in Sturbridge, my drive from Sturbridge to Ludlow, I would take my daughter to the library, and I stumbled across this thing like you just mentioned. I think it was called like Modern Scholar or something like that. And it was all these different college courses that were on CD. And just like you said, that's the perfect use of that commute time. And I listened to all this stuff about, there was a great, I don't remember any of the professors, but I remember hearing something about space and something about, planetary space and star. I listened to that. I listened to a philosophy one. I listened to a whole bunch of different things, and it was like, wow, even music. Like, I learned about like music theory and things like that. Not so much music history, but the theory of music. And it was awesome for me, because it just helped me to occupy that time while I was driving, but at least I made it feel like it wasn't, it felt useful. I was usefully using the useful time.
Yeah.
Whatever. I forgot the word that you just invented.
I think usefully,
it was usefully.
But I agree 100%. I think that's what made it interesting to me, because I went down this path right after high school where I wasn't going to college, and I was kind of stuck down this path where I couldn't, I guess I could, but I didn't even know if I would like school or what I would go to school for. So that'd be a waste of money, and I'd put myself in debt. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this show know my opinion on college. Is it necessary? Probably not. There's a large amount of kids who have jobs that have nothing to do with their degree, and they're stuck with all this debt. And a lot of kids who just come out of school and go right into, I guess, the real world, for lack of a better term, and end up making money immediately, not having all that debt, and also getting some life experience and work experience. Sometimes end up achieving more. But so college seemed like a risky option. And again, I didn't do good in school, according to my grades.
Yeah, but think about the way you look at information. Like you admit, and it's funny because there's another key theme that goes through your podcast is you misquoting things like crazy.
Yeah,
and I love that. Time. But you don't, like, it's really not important. you'll misquote something, and you'll always say the quote is something like this, and I don't remember who said it, but
it's the idea,
the essence of it is
the
there.
essence.
Now, the essence of things aren't what you're tested on in school, even in college. It's not. Occasionally, you'll get a course that is more about what do you think about this, but through middle school, high school, that kind of thing, it's not about the essence of what you're taught. It's about the specifics of what you're taught. So if you don't remember, the exact number, the exact date, or who exactly said this, then that's what you're tested on in school, and that's going to affect your grades, and it's going to make you question, like, geez, I'm not good at school, so therefore I must not be smart.
Yeah.
But if you absorb it in a different way, like you do, like you grasp it, you know what I mean? And it's much better to learn to grasp something than it is to know, the specifics of it.
Yeah. And I think, like, I never did well in math. Like, to me, there was nothing interesting, because I was always in the arts growing up. I loved drawing. I loved painting. Well, I know I didn't really like painting that much, but I loved anything that kind of where I got to do, where I had freedom, and I had the ability to do whatever I wanted and go down any path I wanted. Like, even when I got away from playing soccer when I was really young, because my parents are Portuguese and I had to, and then I kind of rebelled against that, and I wanted to skateboard and BMX, and I liked the idea of, like, here's another way of being creative. Like, there's zero rules. I decide what tricks I want to do, and what order, and how I want to do them. And to me, I love those things. With math, it was always like, it's right or wrong answer. And some people like that. Like, I think, I don't know if it was my buddy Marcin, who's actually watching right now. He just texted me.
Hey, Marcin.
I think he was saying how, and he's a math whiz.
And but that's what he does
enjoys
for work.
that.
He loves
but he
that.
actually enjoys the fact that he's the opposite. Like, we were talking about this, and he was saying how he likes the fact that, and I'm going to misquote him, and he's listening, so that's, now I got some pressure on me. But
maybe you can call in and fix
call in. And so he was saying how he likes the fact that there's a right or wrong answer, because when you're right, where a lot of other things are subjective. It's like, how does a teacher who teaches philosophy tell a kid that he failed? Like,
that's
I guess with just not paying attention. But I'm saying, like, when you give somebody an A or a B,
it's not because you're right or wrong.
Yeah,
it's because you're just not grasping the essence of something. That's the difference between philosophy and math. Like, math, at the end of this gigantic piece of work that you do in this gigantic equation, it ultimately comes down to right or wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, every time.
And Marcin is attracted to that kind of thing. That's what appeals to him. That's what appeals to his mind.
Yeah.
And you're the opposite.
But I get it. I get the idea of, okay, I know for sure this is right, and that gives me comfort in knowing this is right. And there's a way of getting this answer, where, like, with a lot of other things, you have to go on this journey of trying to figure out what's right and wrong. And even when you do find something that might, even with art, but there's a lot of bullshit in art too. With, like, modern art, and the idea of, like, this is, like, this sheet, this sheet is art, and this is the blue sky and the white sky,
but it represents
this is
more
cloudy,
than that.
And it's just like, it's almost like the bullshit behind it.
There was a great, in the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield. He had to do a report on Kurt Vonnegut, and Kurt Vonnegut was actually in the movie and wrote the report for Rodney Dangerfield in the movie. And the professor was like, "This is absolute garbage. Whoever wrote this doesn't know the first thing about Kurt Vonnegut." And Kurt Vonnegut's like, but that's so true, because it's up, some of the stuff that's up for interpretation, we don't know what's right or wrong. And that's, to me, I like that. I like the variety of the way people interpret it. And that's what I like about having conversations with you and talking to you about things. You've changed my mind on a lot of things. We've had a lot of discussions where I'm black, you're white. And by the end, halfway through we're gray, and then it's, it's a little black. Now it's a little more white. And at the end, it's white, so.
Well, I'm not interested in because my mother's always like, oh, you're a talker, this and that. And I'm like, I'm not interested in talking just for the sake of talking. But one thing I absolutely love is sharing ideas. Like, I love having a in-depth conversation. Like, sometimes at the gym, if I end up getting in a real good conversation with somebody, I'm like, okay, I can cut this short and do a workout that really, how important is that to me right now? I can make up the workout later this week or tomorrow or whatever. Or I can keep this conversation going and maybe take something away from this conversation where, if I'm talking to some retired fella who has been through some life experience and has some really interesting opinions on something, like, I'm like, I could take something. Like, so scheme of things, looking down the road, what's more important, that conversation, what's going to have a bigger impact on my life, that conversation or that workout? And
it's so funny. You never know where that little piece of inspiration is going to come from. You could be, just passing someone on the street or just run into someone grabbing a coffee or whatever the case may be. Somebody may say the most profound thing that just makes you think like all day long, like, oh my God, that was so, that guy was right. And it kind of changes your course or whatever. I've had that happen to me a bunch of times, which brings me to a thing that I thought about in retrospect. If I had any technical skill, I would love to go through the last 99 podcasts that you have. And I love every time you have a guest that says something using the term ripple effect, because you reach your guests in a way that they feel like they're contributing to that. And I've heard so many, and Nancy Guberti was one of the people that I remember her saying, yeah, this is really a ripple effect. Like they see what you mean and why you've named the show that. And I wish I could clip together every guest that has ever said that.
I've thought about that
back
too.
To you,
yeah.
Because I would say it's definitely a majority. Probably 70 to 80% of your guests have commented back, like towards the end of their conversation with you, and said something using the term ripple effect, and really felt like they've made an impact through being on your show.
Well, I say that, I've said this numerous of times on the show, like, oh, this is why I called it Ripple Effect Podcast. This is my inspiration. I truly believe in the ripple effect. But, I don't just say it. If I didn't believe in the idea of a ripple or starting our own ripple, this podcast wouldn't exist, because who was I to believe that, 2.5 years, 3 years later, that I would have Dr. Brzezinski on the show, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was chief of staff for Colin Powell in the White House.
I can't believe you've pulled some crazy guests.
Ray McGovern, who's ex-CIA, did the presidential daily briefings from the late 60s to the early 90s. I mean, this was a retired CIA agent. I've had Rick Ross, the real Rick Ross. Jesse Ventura, Sean Stone, the son of Oliver Stone. So to think that, so it's like, if I didn't really believe in this theory, and I think this podcast is an example of how it's not just bullshit. Like, I truly do believe it. And if I didn't believe in it, then I wouldn't continue doing it. And I wouldn't, and it shows for anybody listening who's thinking about doing a podcast. And I say this all the time, but like, if you have anything that motivates you, that you're in love with, do it, chase it. If it's, my buddy Renato, who's overseas playing basketball, I'm sure it's not easy sometimes being away from family for so long. He's been away for years. He's not playing on any huge club team. So it's not like, okay, well, I can forget about being away from home and friends and family in my Lamborghini. It's like, so, but at the end of the day, you never meet an old guy who says he wished he gave up on his dream sooner. That guy doesn't exist, and so I think looking back, that's kind of what we, what we hope for is to look back and say that we pursued things as far. And there was times like, especially right after having my son, and I have anxiety thinking about having my daughter. I'm like, what am I going to find time to do this? I mean, I have some guests already lined up to do shows. I was trying to get this one out of the way first, because I'm like, I can't do 101 without doing 100, and I want to do 100 with you and do the whole live thing and see how that worked out. But just looking back, it's insane. And like I said, deep inside, I wanted to believe that eventually I could get some more guests, but really 99 shows, not a whole lot of shows. And, even with the downloads, like, I don't have numbers that are ridiculous. Like, I've had guests say, guests who actually haven't been on, who, what's send me your number.
I'm sure that's a huge thing for them to ask, which is, I don't know.
To me, it's kind of a,
I can understand where it's coming from. It is kind of,
well, because it's like, well, that tells you something about, like, and I joke around with James Corbett numerous of times, him, Daniele Vignelli. I've joked around with both of them about it, because they were one of the first guests, and they've been on multiple times since. And I'm like, it's crazy that I was like 5 episodes in and you guys came on, because I could have done 6 episodes and that would have been the end of it.
That was like delete email. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, who is this? Who is this? What is this?
And I've had people who've actually, like, I remember when I first started the podcast, people like Ari Shafir and certain people would be like, you know what, I'd love to be on, but I don't, you know, I get so many requests for podcasts unless it's somebody I know. I don't, and I
Yeah.
completely understand that
Yeah.
because now it's like you said, it's an ongoing joke. Like people talk about doing signings and stuff like that. People are like, oh, want to come on my podcast? Hey, want to come on my podcast?
Yeah.
But anybody who's trying, first of all, you can't hate a person for trying. It doesn't hurt to try, and two, I think that it's one of those things where just don't give up. Keep getting guests on. I remember I used to send out like 100, literally like 100 emails, and 5 of them would write back. Like, and who knows, like if they're even,
yeah, that's
and
amazing. I again, like I'm looking, like all the books on your table, all the people that I've been on, like you've landed some insane. What's I would think Jesse Ventura is probably the most surprising to me that you had on.
Yeah.
But when you like, what is your thought on what is the most what guest did you have on that you're like, I can't believe I'm talking to this guy?
I think Jesse Ventura would be him, and actually Marianne Van Zeller, because Marianne Van Zeller had a show that was a hit on Travel Channel while she came on my show. So it was like she was on TV, and I remember she came on my show during the week, and we were talking about her show. Every week they had a new episode, and we we're talking about that week's episode. And it was on Travel Channel, and it was a really cool show called Breaking Borders, where it was really cool theme because her and the chef, this really amazing chef, would go all over the world and get people from two sides of a debate or a conflict. They would get somebody from Israel and somebody from a Palestinian, and they would say, "Hey, we're gonna make this amazing meal. The only fine print is that you're gonna be sharing it with your arch enemy."
Wow.
And
I've never seen it. That's one of the shows that I didn't listen to.
And this cook they would go to the country. He would learn about, and he was an amazing cook who really loved not just making food for people because he saw it as a challenge, as let me not just make like certain types of food. If he was making Mexican food, like for example, they had a Mexican and it's like a Confederate flag waving Texan, and he's like, let me not just make Mexican food, but let me make it the way they make it. Like, where his biggest compliment from people was always like, this tastes the way I would make it, you know?
Wow.
And so he really found appreciation in doing that and trying to make food the way they make it, their people make it. And but it was a beautiful thing because you realize that like one thing all cultures have in common, and we know because we have Muslim friends, we have Estonian friends, we have Mexican, Salvadorian friends, Polish friends, and when we say Polish friends or Salvadorian, we don't mean like great grandparents. These were like right off the boat, like, and one
first generation, second generation.
Yeah, and one thing that I love about every one of their cultures is that they all love to be with family, they all love to eat, and I feel like food's that one thing that all brings people together. You make a big meal or grill some food and have a cookout. And no matter what culture you're from, you might eat things, slightly different than another culture, but we can all come together and enjoy that. And I think after all, and I talked about this with Marianne Van Zeller because it came out in her show, and she was also the one who did OxyContin Express, which was an awesome podcast or awesome documentary. And she was also on the Joe Rogan podcast, which is still pretty crazy that like so many of my guests have been on the Joe Rogan podcast. But one thing that was cool was we would talk about how after you meet these people and you sit down and you talk to them, you realize there's not that much difference between one person and another. Like everybody wants, you want a safe environment for you and your family. I want a safe environment for me and my family. I want some decent schools. I want some decent roads. I want a job so I can pay my bills, a decent job. I don't want to get taxed too much. I don't want to, like we all want basically a lot of similar things. We want good food. We want to be able to enjoy ourselves. Like, we're not that different. And then there's all these other things that end up separating us. But like, I always think to myself, like, I would like to believe that if a Jewish person sees somebody who looks Middle Eastern get hit by a car, first reaction is, and I think this is human instinct, is let me go check if he's okay.
Yeah.
If a conservative sees a liberal get hit by a car, like first reaction is let me see if he's okay. I think all those other things afterwards are really society and culture that
I think you're right. I think that's human nature is better than what it's become. I think our natural instinct is to help each other.
Are we digressing?
I do think we're digressing. I think human beings.
Is that a word? That is
yeah. Well, yeah, because it's the best way to describe what society is doing. Yeah. We're regressing. We're going, well, I
Regressing.
don't even know if I would say degressing, because it's not like we're regressing would be going back to a different way. And we're moving forward in a way where we're becoming more separated. I think like everything is now, we're so divided
We've
on
talked about
so
this.
many
Yeah.
different things. It's crazy how awful human beings are to each other. And I don't think they do it on from their gut. I think they do it based on the stuff that's fed to them in the media and the stuff that they are taught to believe. I don't think it's a natural. I don't think it's natural to behead somebody. I don't think it's natural to kill somebody. But if you are fed these ideals that lead you to act in that way, that's a problem. That's a, what's the word you just made up?
Digress.
Degressing. That's a
Well,
digression.
Christopher Ryan has a book that he's publishing called "Civilized to Death," and it's about this topic. It's about, are we really moving forward? And I feel like technology is advancing. All these things like entertainment, all this stuff's advancing. We have more machines and tools to make things easier, but are we really advancing as a culture, as a society? And I don't think we are, because, like you said, even though we're more connected, we don't communicate in person as much as we would like, as much as we probably used to, because we had to. You know, I still, for example, perfect example, one thing that I like about having you in studio, or like Mike Martins from All That Remains was in studio, who's sitting there, we connected immediately.
Yeah, it's
because
different. Yeah, it's definitely different.
Because you lose something, even with some a piece of technology, which is nothing, not complaining about it. It's awesome to be able to talk to somebody via Skype on the other side of the world.
It's much more intimate than writing them a letter and
absolutely.
mailing it and waiting for that to come back, you know? So it's
tying it to a pigeon.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely,
Yeah.
it has, it's definitely,
But something's missing.
right, but
and I
there is
can't put my
something missing.
finger on it, but I can't explain it, but there's something missing. I don't know if there's the positive energy, what it is. There's something that just doesn't seem the same. And I mean, a little bit, it's just it's technology. There's a delay. I mean, you end up talking over each other a little bit because you say something.
Well, there's a wall. There's a physical barrier between you and the person you're talking to. You know, there's no physical connection, you know?
Yeah, which I wonder what, maybe that's why the Pokemon Go. I mean, look at these things where, like, now you're in this virtual reality where you're walking through reality, but yet you're looking at it virtually. I mean, that is the future, you know, something like that. And I wonder if it's going to get to a point where we're just like, this is bullshit. Why would I want to live in this life where things die and you have to work hard for things, where I can live in this reality where I can have everything I want?
But nobody wants,
but what's
like, nobody wants reality anymore. We all want to be numb to the pain of life. And I like, and Daniele Bolelli is a perfect, like, he's got the perfect attitude from the way I see it. Like, all of that is part of what makes being alive and being human worth it, because you
the
can't,
yang into the yang.
Yeah, you have to.
You don't
have
appreciate
pain.
the bad.
You have to
if
suffer.
You don't.
If everything's handed to you and you don't earn anything, it's meaningless. If you don't know the pain of loss, then you don't know the value of having. You know, if you know, if you read the obituaries and a stranger dies, there's no connection there. You don't feel anything. If it's somebody, you know, the closer somebody is to you, the more pain you feel, the more value something has. So I think there's definitely, you know, that's part of life, and we just want to shield ourselves from that and numb ourselves to that.
Well, I've told friends that are in relationships that they're always together, and I'm like, listen, you can't miss each other.
Yeah,
if you're together all the time, like, it's healthy and good to spend some time apart. Go out with your friends. Let her go out with her friends. Because you know what? At the end of the night, you'll be excited that you're coming to the same house. You'll be sleeping in the same bed. But if you're together every single day, you can't appreciate something. You can't miss something that you're with all the time. The same thing with dieting. Like, I look Monday through most of Friday, I eat really good. But I can't wait till Friday night where you know, my wife makes dinner and when I can binge eat, or you know, Saturday night or whatever, or the weekends where I eat pizza or whatever. And then Monday I'm back at it.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that pizza.
Right. If you did that every day,
that food would be nothing.
Yeah, that first bite of pizza you have after not having pizza for so long is like it's a crazy thing. While my daughter was living in Hawaii, I'll never forget the feeling that I had. Like, when she left, it was devastating for me. I knew it was a good thing for her, but I'll never forget the excitement of being on the plane to go visit her in Hawaii for the very first time. Like I was out of my mind excited. I can't remember being that excited sitting on the plane. I even said to the person next to me, I'm like, look, I might start crying. I'm going through like this emotional thing. My daughter's moved out to Hawaii, and this is the first time I'm going to see her. I remember just like the insane excitement, and nothing beat that, like that first hug after not seeing her for the number of weeks that I'd gone. Well, look at your son. Just when he left, like he cries when he says goodbye. Like that
breaks my heart.
But that's life, though. You know what I mean? Like that's
and
reality.
And you hit on a point that's so important. This idea that if we just had everything we wanted whenever we wanted, we would lose something that makes us human and make us appreciate things. And you know, it is weird because we know for a fact that eventually, because I mean, I've been at my brother's house or my house where I've had friends who don't play video games walk in. I remember, actually, I think it was Chris Baltazar, a friend of ours, who walked into Bruno's house and they were playing FIFA or some soccer game, and Chris is like, "Oh, who's playing?" And then he's like, "Oh, it's a video game." And he's like, "That's a video game?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Holy shit," you know, and probably last time he played a video game was a Nintendo or Sega Genesis, and to him it advanced quite a bit. And I think when you watch it advance, it's like anything, you don't really notice how much it's progressed. But we know for a fact eventually it's going to progress so much where we won't be able to know the difference between reality and virtual reality. And that's just going to be the future. We don't know how soon it's going to be, but that's going to be the future. Now I wonder if it's going to be like a lot of things where we think it's something we want until we have it. And the weird thing about a lot of these scientists and people futurists who are working on this technology, they don't look at the debates about they don't look at philosophy. They don't look at like the debates morally or what it's going to do to society. They just want to keep advancing their work, you know? And I think that what ends up happening is you have this group of guys or a group of people who love technology and keep advancing, and they don't see the long-term effects of what it could. It's like, you know, creating the atom bomb, you know, it's or the technology that led to the atom bomb, Albert Einstein, who regretted coming up with the idea. Or the research. Wait, he didn't create the atom bomb. That was the Manhattan Project. But his research is what helped create it. Led to it, and he regretted it. You know, and I think that's what's going to end up happening. What's going to end up happening is that there's people who probably have no bad intentions, but are just really excited.
But you can't stop that. I mean, you mentioned this. You can't know what this groundbreaking discovery is going to ultimately lead to. And, you know, look at this Pokemon Go thing right now. Like, it only took a couple of weeks for it to get huge, and it's already being, you know, people are using it to assault other people. It's just
they're stealing people's cell phones. Like, so, people know where there is one, and then they're waiting for kids and taking their cell phones. There's a guy, I heard this on the Joe Rogan podcast. There's this guy who apparently old churches are something like it's good to go to old church.
Oh yeah. Like the training ground.
Yeah, exactly. Like and this guy's house used to be an old church, so there's all these kids just showing up to his house. You know, but the crazy thing is, listen,
what a perfect way for like some kind of predator to just, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Wait. But the crazy thing is that you're giving, and James Corbett wrote an article on this, the link between the CEO of the company who created the game, and the link between the CIA, and there is a link. But the crazy thing, okay, even if you don't want to get all conspiratorial, but we are giving Google Maps, because they're working with Google Maps, they're using their information to do this game. We're giving them access to our camera, and they're taking pictures of everything in your house. And they're saying within a year, you could probably have like 90% of the US could have, like, they could recreate in this digital world. Just
it's like amazing. Just Google Earth now, since it's come out, the trees and everything, like the 3D version. I was working a detail, and I showed this to Sydney. I was working a detail, and I saw the Google car go by me, and so just the other day, I was like, it dawned on me, like I remember doing that. So I went to the spot where I was, and I found myself standing there on Google. It's hilarious. It's crazy. But
it's crazy. But you know, that's the thing. Like, people say, oh, it's free services, but is it free? What we're sacrificing is our privacy, which might be something like the weird thing with every generation is that whatever there's no such thing as normal.
Right.
So
Everything normal is new to the next new normal.
exactly. Oh yeah, perfect way of putting it. And so our children, they grow up in a world with only social media, with only giving up your privacy. So that new generation is never going to know what they're giving up, because they grew up basically immune to this new idea or this way of life.
Think about
But are we being old people and being like,
you know what?
they're
But
gonna ruin things?
think about what is the thing you got to click on every time you sign something, like the privacy policies,
Terms
right?
and conditions.
Terms and conditions.
There's a great documentary called.
Dude, I actually have read some, like I usually read some of it. Like I'll usually, if it's something I'm like, I got to know a little bit about this before I check it. I don't think kids now even like, it's just an automatic, like,
yeah, but it's
a waste of time.
There's a great documentary called Terms and Conditions May Apply. It's on Netflix. And actually, I was supposed to get the filmmaker on. I actually can't remember why I never contacted him again.
Because you were waiting for me to do 100?
Probably. And but this was a long time ago, actually. I should probably reconnect with them, even though it's an older documentary. But it's
waiting for me to do 50?
It was a really good documentary, because they break down because there's a website that basically archives everything, and like they archive or something like that. Some way they have an archive of terms and conditions online, like on Google, on whatever, and they'll lie. You'll agree to something, then they'll slightly change it and not ask you to agree again.
Yeah.
They'll just use the new information, and they purposely use small fonts, hard to read fonts, like all this stuff, and make it long on purpose. Like this is a conscious effort in trying to get you to be like, this is too long. I'm not going to read all this shit. I'm just going to agree. And
what's going to happen the day when somebody challenges that and it goes to court, and the rebuttal is, well, you check this box signing the terms and conditions.
You're fucked. That's it.
But are you really? I mean, can you have to consciously be able to say that you absorb the information that was provided to you just because you?
Yeah, but
I don't know. To me, that doesn't seem like it's legally binding, especially when you could say, if I was an attorney,
just find a loophole.
If I was an attorney, I'd say, listen, what, I don't know, how long would it take for somebody to actually read the terms and conditions that they check to? And this person downloaded this app at 9:59, and they used the app at 10:01. There's no way they read the terms and conditions in those 3 minutes. So clearly they didn't read it. They didn't understand it. So to say that is some kind of legally binding agreement, just because you sign something, but you have to knowingly sign something.
Wouldn't that give you a pass on almost every contract if you just say I didn't read the whole thing?
Well, I would think it would give you a pass on a ridiculously, obscenely long contract. But if you go buy a car, it's 1-page document. You sign off on it.
There's a lot of shit you sign.
Think about that. Think about when you buy a house. It's it's this thick. That's a lot of people were able to. I heard something about winning some kind of lawsuits against banks for loans that were robo-signed.
Yeah,
meaning that the other end of things, nobody actually read the documents.
Well, the people were getting their houses back also because the paperwork was basically when the whole Ponzi scheme about people selling loans to other banks. And they were doing it, moved hands so much that they lost the paperwork.
Yeah,
and so they got to keep their house because they couldn't find the paperwork to prove that
that's crazy. I refinanced my house and never made a payment to the company that I refinanced through. As soon as the paper was signed, my very first bill came from a huge bank.
It's a necessary evil, like banks. Like sometimes I wonder. I'm like, there is something nice about the fact that I don't actually have to make enough money to actually completely purchase something to have things I want.
Yeah.
Like the idea sounds nice, but in a way I also understand that it is a way of convincing you to buy shit you can't afford.
Right.
So you can stay in this debt and be in this, because you look how little freedom you have when you create that. Because what ends up happening is that, are you trying to push that back?
No, I'm good.
Because once you create debt, it's like, well, now I'm stuck here because I own this house, I own this car. Yeah. I have to keep this job. I can't lose this job. I can't, Christopher Ryan, he's an author and podcaster, and I've told you about his work. He wrote the book Sex at Dawn, which I think is over there too. But he he gets a lot of emails about, because he does tons of traveling, and he's like, you know, people are like, oh, I wish I could do that. You've seen so much of the world, you've met so many interesting people, and he has like endless amounts of stories because he's always traveling, and when you travel, you meet people,
Yeah.
and you know, and he did a intro for a podcast where he was talking about how you can't, like, you have to choose your lifestyle, you have to choose what path and journey you want to lead, because you can either decide, okay, I want a big house and I want to have a family and stuff like that. He sacrificed those things. He till this day doesn't own a house, and he's 50 something years old, you know, never had kids. So even though in the outside looking in, yeah, it looks all wonderful, like his lifestyle seems like something to be envious of,
Yeah.
but he had a and he was making the point that like anybody can do this as long as you're willing to
In exchange for this,
exchange for this, exactly.
You know? So,
And I think that unfortunately society and culture will tell you that if you're 50 and you not married and you don't have
something's
kids,
wrong with
something's
you.
wrong with
Yeah.
you. And I think you can contribute to society. Like if I never had kids, I'd figure this is a way of contributing to society. Even if I didn't have this, my way of contributing. And I tell people, you know, on the podcast all the time, like, even if you're just sparking conversation with your friends, if you're being open-minded, like you talked about how we disagree on things and then we meet somewhere in the middle. A lot of people aren't capable of doing that.
Yeah.
A lot of people aren't capable.
No matter what you tell them either, you know. It's funny, I just saw a thing on right now, the Trump and Clinton thing. And I remember in the past, as you know, any political season, you know, the likelihood of changing. So many people right now, and again, I sound like you know because I can't quote it directly, but the number of people for Trump was this number, the number of people for Clinton were this number, and then it was like, what? Any chance that you change your mind? No, there was no undecided. It was like this or this, and I'm sticking to it. Like to be that committed to a candidate right now, to me, it's mind-blowing. So much can happen between now and then that you can find out about somebody. To say, oh, I would never do to be this fully committed to a candidate this early in the race is just, it's bizarre to me.
It is. And what you're saying is that, like, the fact that anybody would say, this is my opinion and this isn't going to change, to me is ridiculous. I mean, the common theme with this podcast, even when I talk to religious people, I'm like, this is my opinion, but obviously I don't have all the information. You can't possibly have all the information. And it can easily change. And it can, and as I take in more information, as I examine information maybe I already have, my opinions can change. And I think when people are so passionate about things, you know, for example, you'll see people, they seem very open-minded about certain topics, but then you hit on that one top,
like what?
Yeah, I remember being at my buddy Ben's house, and there's this kid that was friends with him, and he's like, "Oh, Rick, you and this kid have a lot in common. You know, you have all these, you know, similar views." And then all of a sudden we start talking about unions, and you know, being having a small business, I'm like, you know, there's a place for it, but I don't think there's like, they really need to, they're not necessary anymore. You know, I think that there's a lot of corruption in them. You're giving tons of money and you're not getting a lot. I mean, a lot of people believe that, hey, with the money that I'm contributing to this union, I could create my own insurance plan instead of them just deciding for me, and I could put money aside. I mean, what you're really doing is saying, hey, I'm not responsible enough to put this money aside, so I'll let you do it. But they also take a lot of that money, and you see issues with corruption, with money disappearing, laundering, all this stuff, you know, just issues. So, I mean, and I think when you're in that situation, and it might not be unions, I say the same thing. It's not politics isn't the issue. Corporations aren't the issue. People are the issue.
Yeah.
There's always going to be corrupt people in every line of work. Doesn't matter if you're working at Mickey D's and you're stealing, or you're a union president and you're hiding money, or you work at a church and you're stealing money from people. So or you're convincing people to give you their money, which is basically stealing. But you know, I think that there's corrupt people everywhere, and I'm trying to stall because I lost my point. But where was I going with this?
You were talking about, you're trying to stall. You were talking about different opinions, how people can have different opinions. I had just finished saying about.
Oh, that's right. That you refresh my memories. Yeah. So this kid, I get him talking about unions. All of a sudden, he goes ape shit. And the thing is that he wouldn't even, like, I made, you know, I was trying to make points, and I won't get into the specifics because it would probably make for a boring conversation. But I was trying to make points on how, like, in this aspect, unions can be bad, you know, and he just wouldn't give me any of it. And it was a perfect example of somebody who open-minded with so many different things, but for some reason, and I don't know, maybe his dad was head of a union. He was, and that's the thing, like you wonder, because a lot of times you meet somebody who's super passionate about something, and then you find out a little more about them, like, oh, that's why they hit a nerve.
There's always a reason.
There's always a reason, yeah. And that's, you know, that's the thing with about being a parent. Like, your opinions could easily influence your kids, or they do influence your kids' opinions. And if I have too strong of opinion, I could make one of these kids who is one. And
you see that in kids all the time. I mean, you know, what's a third or fourth grader have to do with, you know, political things? You know, when you have like a little kid that's on YouTube saying, you know, stuff about Trump or whatever, like that's
you're
not
brainwashing.
That's not a, you know, an organic thought that grew out of their brain based on some debate that they watched. That's something their dad said or mom said, and they just start repeating it.
Yeah,
you
know? And that's what ends up happening. I think that one thing that you said, and you've said some things on the show like about parenting that stuck with me, because now being a parent, I'm like, one day I'm going to need this information. And one thing that you've said, which is always really interesting, is how if your daughter disagrees with you, you'll let her make her point.
Yeah.
And if she makes a good, valid point, you'll actually budge a little bit. And I think that's so important, because, you know, that's one thing I talked to my wife about. I'm like, eventually, you know, we're going to say something and he's going to say, no, he thinks we're wrong, or we should let him do something. And I'm like, we have to be good at saying, hey, make your argument and make your debate. And if you make a point, and I mean, I might be wrong. I might be wrong on why I believe you shouldn't be able to do this. So make your point. And I think that that's important, because I think that as kids, and I don't know how your parents were, but my parents always try to convince me that they had everything figured out, and I should listen to them because they all-knowing parents, and I'm just a kid.
But they wouldn't explain it. You know,
they wouldn't. Yeah, and
that's how that's what was for me as a kid growing up. I would hate to just get an answer with no explanation. So if I would, you know, I'd ask for something, if the answer was no, I'd want to know why, and because I said so, just was the most frustrating thing you can hear. You know, so I think and I think a lot of my parenting comes from not only the good things that I got from my parents, but also from the bad things or the most frustrating things. You know, you can learn through positive role models. You could learn because, like, geez, I hate this about this person, so I never want to be that way. And I just always wanted to have, you know, facts, not so much facts, but a reason to back, you know, an answer that I give. And if my daughter asks me for something and I have an answer, I need to be able to support why that's the answer. It's just not yes or no, because it's yeah, this, you can do this because blah, 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 or I need you to do this, and this is the reason. You know, this is my explanation as to why I feel that way. And I think that's, to me, I think that's important to me. Whether that's important, I don't know, but to me it's important because it was a source of frustration for me growing up, and it's something like, geez, I never want to do that. I never want to do that. So
yeah, and then James Corbett said something along those lines where he was saying, like, we're talking about parenting, and he was saying how the most important thing for him is to teach his kid how to think, like, let his kids think and question things. And yeah, I mean, I think that's what sparked my interest in so many things, is just not going along with the herd, but questioning, why should I be religious? Why should I believe this is the norm? Why? What is the norm? Like, what is norm? You know, what is a normal? For example, we talked about kids. One thing that I've kind of observed from being a parent was the fact that, did something turn off? Oh,
no.
Yeah, it stopped. Yeah, let me just Pro Tools stop for a second. Let me just start recording that again. Dave, keep talking. Stall.
Keep talking. I don't know. What were you just saying?
About James Corbett.
Oh yeah. You know what? I think that there's the worst things about me, as I look back in my life, the worst things about me are things that I just did because that's what was done. And I think the things that I like most about myself are the things that I've discovered on my own, the things that I've thought through on my own, rather than having someone implant that thought into me. You know what I mean? I think there are religious people that do so without thinking about it, and I don't know that that's such a healthy thing. I think that if somebody finds their place in a religion because of their own searching, then I think that is a valuable thing. But I think if somebody's brought into a certain way of thinking because that's the only thing that they're exposed to, I don't know that that's such a healthy thing either. To not see the other side because you never have, and it's just foreign to you. I think that you know, that could be harmful.
Yeah, and actually, religion is one of those things we kind of disagree on because
Yeah.
even though I was very much, and not because like people know, I'm not religious. I'm an atheist and or agnostic or whatever. I just don't know, to be completely
I don't
honest with
even
you.
need to
Yeah, I
give it
don't
a
like a
name,
label.
you
Yeah,
know?
I'm not a big fan of label either. But I also think that there's there's nothing like my opinions change a lot. You know, when I was first became an atheist, I think that, or whatever the word is, when I became not religious, or
You know what's funny is if you were brought up religious, it's not that you become an atheist, you just unbecome religious.
yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I don't like the term because I kind of feel like you're leaving one group to join another,
Yeah,
you know,
and that's a good point. That's a good point.
and I don't
I don't
I
have
don't
to commit to anything.
exactly. And you know,
And
I
that's part of not being religious. Like religion is so about having
we
a
know
commitment
truth with a capital
to
T.
you know, this faith. And I think not having faith in anything is it's a freeing thought. You know what I mean? When you accept responsibility for all the good and bad in your life and see it for what it is, and stop blaming outside forces and, oh, why me, and this is for it's all part of some big plan. It's crazy talk. It
It
really,
is.
and I don't want to get into that because like, you know, like the union thing, that's a really sensitive subject for a lot of people. But
Yeah, but I also think like one thing that's really interesting is how we're always told, oh, you shouldn't. And I've had my wife do it, like poke me, don't talk about politics, don't talk about
yeah,
religion. And people will bring something, and I'm like, I don't get it. Like me and this person can argue till the end of days about, and I use a religious term, the end of days, but
yeah,
the end of days about sports. I've seen people get in heat, and obviously, you know, my brother's a huge sports fan. I've seen him get in really, you know, pretty emotional, intense arguments about who Celtics should draft, like just recently,
yeah.
or whatever, and that's completely okay because it's sports. But like, we can't have anything even close to that type of intense conversation about religion or politics. So, and they're two topics that are much more important than sports.
There's nothing you could say to me in terms of religion or politics that would offend me. I might think you're an idiot for thinking a certain thing, and you might think I'm an idiot, but I'm not going to hate you for it, and it's not going to, you know, it's not going to offend me.
Yeah, but aren't we almost as a society agreeing to this theme that we shouldn't talk about religion or politics? And the reason why we shouldn't, we all agree, is because we, in most cases, or in some cases, it may cause a very heated conversation or debate. Okay, so what we're really saying is that a lot of people are closed-minded on these issues. If you bring it up, you're going to get in a heated conversation that's going to lead to nothing, and two people are just going to get mad at each
Yeah.
other. So we're all agreeing that people are closed-minded and we can't talk about
Well,
this.
think
How
about
about
this though. Think about, it's always been that way. Because if you think about the Constitution, when they were writing these things, they wanted, you know, think about secret ballot and elections and voting. That's all private. We have laws that prevent people from, you know, during election season, you see signs everywhere, but there's a distance from a polling place that you're not allowed to discuss politics. You're not allowed to hold signs, wear buttons within a certain buffer safety zone. And the reason for that is because of that. And it's been that way forever. We need a space where we can be free to think how we want, and we have secret ballots. And even the Constitution talks about the freedom of religion, and that's without government interference. So it's as far back as it's as old as at least this country. It's why people, you know, left England to come here, is to be able to practice that without any kind of, you know, outside influence. And I think it's a healthy thing, but clearly it's the cause of war. It's the cause of, you know, the strongest disagreements we can possibly have.
Oh, absolutely. But one thing that's really interesting too is, I mean, I think one thing that is amazing is how even those constitutional values still make sense today. And you know, how old were these guys when they're
Yeah.
writing this shit? I mean, they were teens, 20s.
I
I don't
wonder
even know,
what would
but
happen now. I mean, to sit down, like, I don't know, do we have the minds to even
we
think some of this stuff through? Or do we have minds
I'll
that
tell you
would?
one thing, it wouldn't be
It wouldn't be
politics. Yeah,
politicians.
because they're like the dumbest of the dumb. Like
Yeah,
back then, our politicians were almost philosophers because these moral what's the word I'm looking for?
just make one
Blueprints,
up.
this moral blueprints to how what is right and what is wrong and how people should be treated,
Yeah,
how influential government should or should not be. Like those are questions, and that, you know, politicians are really good at picking a philosophy they like or picking a party they like, and then sticking by it and trying to get votes. I mean, really, and trying to get campaign money and that nonsense. But these guys were almost philosophers
yeah,
in the way that they were. I mean, like you said, to write something like that today, you would have to assume that only a philosopher or intellectual would be able to really come up with these really uh, fair and interesting, and not just that, the pressure of coming up with these themes and these ideas that have to last even beyond this generation, even beyond this society, culture, reality that we know,
yeah,
you know. And so we have to think like, okay, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, this still has to make sense,
yeah,
you know. And I think that for the most part, they, you know, a lot of things do make sense, like the right to pursue happiness. I always say, you know, people always say you have the right to pursue happiness until you're, you know, it's something they don't like they mean I have the right to pursue my happiness, don't get in the way of the things I
yeah.
enjoy.
That's
But like,
true.
you know, weed smokers, you know, have been picked on by alcohol drinkers, and you know, gun rights people have picked on women who want to have the right to have abortion. So it's like, don't take away my freedoms, but and then it's like it's okay to take somebody else's freedoms,
Yeah,
you know. So it's like, but the way I always look at it is like, we all have the right to pursue happiness as long as you're not interfering with somebody else's right to pursue
right,
happiness. And
right.
we all just looked at it in that way. Then I think we could come to terms much. We could find a middle ground that makes much more sense. But we talked about how what's normal and how we grow up in a world where like this generation, this is normal. That as things change and they grow up in a different type of environment, then that's normal to them. And questioning things and questioning what's normal is important. But even like something like the Constitution, like there's people who are like, oh, Constitution, everything that's in there is correct and we should live by it and we should, you know. But even that, like, that could be wrong. Like, why
Yeah,
can't we, like, the idea that we can't even question that, like, you know, if we wrote a constitution, like you said, we wrote a constitution today, like we should be okay with the fact that maybe 1,000 years from now things don't make sense, or maybe
yeah.
we could change things. I mean, look at prohibition. Wasn't that in the Constitution and then they
It was,
amended
and then
it? Or
it went in and then came out. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, the
so perfect
Constitution is
example.
supposed to be something that is it's a
Amendable.
evolving, you know. But nowadays, it's I don't know.
But I my point is that like I don't also like the idea that they look at it almost like it's a holy book, like, and what's in this is right, this
Yeah,
writing is right, and we can't even question if this is right or not. Like I think that that also pigeonholes you and puts you in a box where you can't be
yeah,
open-minded and question it. Like I think there's nothing wrong with questioning the fact that, I mean, maybe if those founding fathers were alive today, they would go back and be like, you know what, I would have rewrote that. You know, if I could live till I was 25, I would have thought it through, you know. So I mean, I think that that's important too. I think a lot of, you get constitutionalists, I think that's the word, that people who are all for the Constitution, which nothing wrong with that, but they look at it almost like, and you know what, now that I think of it, it's probably not coincidental that a lot of those people are Christians, really religious, you know, Southerners who look at it almost like a holy book, you know.
yeah,
Similar to the way they look at the Bible, like this is the word of God, living gods who came up with these truth with a capital T, and this was makes perfect sense, and damn you if you try to say this is
yeah,
incorrect, you know. And I think that's a very dangerous way of thinking. I think that we should always, I mean, being episode 100, I think one thing which it's amazing to me is how much I've learned throughout this whole journey, because I really feel like this has been a journey, and how much my opinions have changed in some ways. You know, a lot of things have. So it's like I've got to grow on air. People have heard me sound like a dumbass or in many shows, probably 80% of them, and watch me grow as a person, watch me grow as a thinker. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, like we talked about this before we started recording, I believe, about how it's surreal, the fact that one day my son can be my age and he'll be like, you know what? I wonder what my dad was like when in his 20s. I wonder what my dad was thinking when he got my mom pregnant. You know, what was he saying on the air? Like, to go back and have hours and hours of conversation like, it'd be amazing. Like, obviously your parents or my parents will tell you, you know, you'll try to get stories about when they were kids, but
he gets to hear it from you, you know,
he gets to hear
and
I don't sugarcoat it.
And he gets to hear, not like hear it from you, but hear you and come to his own conclusion about what your state of mind was, you know.
But that's pretty amazing, man.
Yeah,
like it's hours and hours of conversation, and you get to go back and you have this digital record of somebody you love. You know, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I think it's almost like one more motivation to continue doing this.
Yeah, that's huge.
I think it's, you know, the same way you look at like old pictures or whatever. Maybe one day he'll look at old podcasts.
You know what's funny is I told you when we went down to New Orleans, Steve Gleason, the
New Orleans. We should talk about that.
Well, I told you I wanted to find the blocked punt statue. Now,
did we?
No, we never did. We didn't make it much past Bourbon Street, but now we have to go back. But Steve Gleason's just an amazing guy who had an NFL career, was diagnosed with ALS, and when that diagnosis happened, he consciously wanted to document his life, and he's done that. And he ended up having a child, and he got married, had a child, and through that whole process, this disease has you know, evolved in him. And I think the movie comes out this week, the Steve Gleason story, and it's taken from his own. You know, he set out to say, I want my son to know me, you know, and you know, ultimately the disease is fatal. And there are some of the things that I've seen in the trailer where he talks about, you know, I want to stay alive just till you're old enough to walk. And the guy's still around, you know. Just an amazing story. So it's very similar to what you're talking about. I definitely would recommend the movie. I think I sent a clip to you guys. I don't know if the one link I sent you guys after New Orleans was the trailer to this movie, and it's exactly what you're talking about.
I think I deleted everything that was sent to me after New Orleans.
All right. That's probably a good thing. That's probably a good thing. But definitely an inspiration, and you're doing the same thing, you know.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool to think that you can do that. And I think as you get older, as you get closer to the finish line, one thing that becomes really important is not important, but something that at least I think you think about more than you probably ever have if you have before is legacy. And what are you leaving behind, you know? And we're human. We can only, I mean, for now, we can only live for so many years, but our memory or the way we influence people, that is so much more important. I work with people who are so motivated business wise. You know, it's like everything's about making more money. It's about you know, how can I make more money? I'm motivated to work more. I'm more, you know, and it's like these, like my dad, for example, we're working in Pittsfield. My dad did those projects 20 years ago, that sidewalks 20 years ago when they did it the first time. Now we're ripping them out, and he's still doing it a second time.
Oh, wow.
And I forget, one of the guys that were at the job site, it's like, this is when you know you should retire, when you're doing the same sidewalks the second time.
When your sidewalks, wow.
And but you know, for example, like, so you're all proud of this work, right? You know, and then one day people just rip it out, and then something new goes in, and it's like it's forgotten, and it's just like, you know, in other words, that what I'm doing at work isn't that important. What would last much longer than those sidewalks, which didn't even last his lifespan, is the way he is as a father to me, the way he's a carefree, always happy person who's unconfrontational and has taught me to enjoy life to some extent. You know, my dad's the complete opposite of 99% of business owners. He doesn't give a shit. Well, he cares about making enough money to keep the doors open and keep the company going, but he doesn't, ever need more. He doesn't need more.
That's the key to
and
life, I think.
yeah, I think that's so important. This idea of greed, wanting more than you need. And I think that did I just write a line? Was that a line from one of my songs? I feel like I just rhymed.
What is it? Satisfaction is the death of
That's
desire.
Yeah, that's a great quote. Yeah. But that's a Hatebreed album. That's the band Hatebreed. That I had a Hatebreed shirt that said that quote on the back, and I never forgot that quote because when I first read it, at first it was a metal band, so I was like, how deep is this?
They must be mad.
Yeah, and then I read it and I'm like, holy shit! Like that's such a simple phrase, simple quote, easy to understand, but it's so true. Like, yeah, satisfaction is the death of desire. Like, it shows you how. For example, I've had some nice cars, and I remember the first time I wanted a Corvette. I would dream about it. I would read every review. Every time one drove by, I just dreamed myself driving one and how happy it would make me. And then I got one, and did it make me happy? Fuck yeah! The car is amazing. I had a beautiful 01 Z06, 400 horsepower. It was just amazing and well-engineered car that was just fun to drive, turn heads. But that went away.
Yeah,
it went away in time. And then the new Vet came out, and I wanted a new Vet. And I'm like, this is so temporary. This is so, satisfied. I was satisfied, and desire was gone. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about food, sex. I mean, even dieting, for example. Like, imagine when you eat like shit, or not imagine. We've all done it. I mean, think about when you eat like shit, and you eat like shit because all you're doing is having a little bit of mouth pleasure. Like all you're doing is like, and now I feel like shit for a
that's really
day.
you know what? That's like, one of the keys that helps me eat healthy is that like the short-term pleasure of tasting something never is worth the long-term pain of looking at yourself and being like, oh man, I feel like shit. I look like shit. I go to the gym for all these hours, and you blow it in 10 seconds of shoving something in your mouth.
It's just like it's taste buds in your mouth that are giving happy signals to your brain saying this is delicious. And then that's gone. Like immediately after you swallow it, it's gone. And now you feel like you're stuck with feeling like shit.
No.
Yeah, it's crazy. I wonder if there was a way of having like mouthwash that would give you the same taste and you get to spit it out.
I remember when I was on the wrestling team, I used to starve myself to lose weight, and I remember
so
one
much
time,
that you went blind once.
Yeah, that's not for recording. We're not going to talk about.
Hey, by the way, somebody write me a comment if Holly Holmes fought already, and if she won. I'm really interested. So tweet me, write us on Facebook. Also, I didn't say this yet, but if you're on Facebook, we have some people sharing our links and stuff like that on Facebook. Feel free to write a comment if you have anything to say about what we're talking about. If you have any questions or comments, please share. We'll check our phones every once in a while, and if there's anything worth bringing up, or if it's something you want us to bring up, we will. So but sorry, continue. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I ate a full meatball grinder, but I didn't swallow it. But I needed to eat, like mentally I needed to eat something, but physically I couldn't because I had to make weight. So I would eat, I would bite into it, I would chew it, and instead of swallowing it, I would spit it out. And I did that to a whole grinder, and it psychologically satisfied me, and I made weight. So it's like one of those things where you sometimes that psychological need to taste something,
Now this goes almost to another point, like what a grinder tastes like, so that's why you needed it. Now this week we're talking about society. It's funny, I was laughing because Marcin commented the satisfaction of a zebra cake.
I love the Marcin zebra cake thing.
What's funny is how I don't think
the whole thing with robbing the tobacco, like I would rather I'd smoke a cigarette, which I've never done in my life, before I'd eat a zebra cake. Those things are so awful.
I ate them when I was a kid, and I remember loving them. Really, why do you say they're awful?
You know what? It's funny. I didn't even know that guys were texting in on this stuff. I'm gonna have to take a minute to read it, but
just wait till I go on a long range.
I just haven't eaten that stuff in so long, and it's funny because I used to eat that stuff and I used to love it. But if you stop for a while, if you can get yourself to stop and then you go back to it, it doesn't taste natural. You know what I mean? Your body, your taste buds and everything, you definitely And I think a lot of what you eat, you associate with certain things. Like there's so much in our lives that we do that are based on association, music especially. Like your top favorite songs bring you to a point in your life that it was a great time in your life. And I think
work. We
I
we
love
heard that
that.
song about a trillion
I
times
love
in
that
New
song
Orleans.
now. You know, it makes me want
But
to
every
just
time
drop
we
a
hear it,
people's
we think
elbow.
of New Orleans.
But I think that there's different associations that we get with everything that we do. And I think food is definitely one of the most powerful things out there. It has become that. I don't think human beings were designed that way, but I think through the commercialization and the way food is produced now, like we are sugar, fat, salt addicts, you
Well,
know?
I think we take for granted how addictive sugar is.
It's
Like
crazy.
it's more addictive than, I don't know if it's heroin or cocaine, but one of them, it's statistically proven to be more addictive. And it sounds insane, but I mean, look at how many people we know who literally could not take sugar out of their diet. I mean, and carbs, same thing. I mean, there's certain things. Are you laughing about a couple text messages?
Marcin is contesting that eating zebra cakes is not a short-term pleasure. If you if you eat 10 of them, it's a 15 or 20 minutes of sheer pleasure.
Our buddy Marcin, he's it's funny. Do you think he's addicted to sugar? He probably is a little bit.
I think we all are to some degree. I think we all are to some degree.
I think anything that makes you feel good, you could say you're addictive to, because we're addicted to things that make us feel good.
Yeah.
I mean, we're
you're right.
I mean, I've said this numerous of times about how we eat things that make us happy. We do things that make us happy. We play games that make us happy, hang out with friends that make you happy. I mean, you hear sometimes about like, oh, that guy's a miserable fuck. Like, you don't want to hang out with that dude because that dude brings down the vibe.
Yeah,
you enjoy hanging out with the friends that are always making you laugh or cracking up. That like for example, we have a good group of friends where we can go out anywhere. You know, for example, in New Orleans.
And, no doubt, man. And I'll tell you what, that's one of the greatest. Like that's one of the greatest for me. Greatest pleasures of life is a lot of the friendships that I have, and most of my best, most fun friends I met through you. And I don't know what it is about you and Bruno. You guys just attract
cool friend collectors.
It's unbelievable. And it's I think we've probably talked about this on this podcast before. There's probably like 15 or 20 total. And on any given night, it's 5 or 7.
Yeah.
And you never know, like, you never know what's going to happen. And even like the trip to New Orleans, you've touched on a couple of times, that group of guys, it's never been just that group of guys. We got on a plane and went down to New Orleans, really
and
kind of
like
lived
together.
Yeah, we all know each other.
Days.
We all like each other, but we've never been all together like that. And there was just something about that group that turned out to be
awesome. Yeah.
Just, for lack of better words, like magical. You know what I mean?
I have to admit, like when I meet somebody who I think, oh, this person seems really cool, this person seems fun and trustworthy and all these things, I'm like, why not invite them to hang out? Or how about I go hang out with them or whatever? And I think that it is hard to meet people like that. It is hard. And I'll tell you, that's one thing about podcasting too. One thing you hear a common theme with a lot of people who listen to podcasts, and I'm sure even with this one, because the cool thing about the internet is that I can see all the cities and states and countries that this podcast is downloaded. I mean, it's downloaded in Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Venezuela. I mean, you name it, every continent it's represented. And it makes you wonder, like, we might be those friends to them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like they don't have friends who talk like we do and maybe are interested in the same topics. Like I've heard Joe Rogan talk about this, about how he'll have a lot of people that say that to him, like how I don't have any friends who are in the topics that you guys are talking about. So when I'm hearing you guys hang out and bullshit, I feel like I'm hanging out with you guys and bullshit.
Yeah, I'm sure
yeah. And I love that too. Like that's one thing I always like, because even though we have a lot of good friends, we don't necessarily have a lot of friends that are interested in all the same topics. We have guys that are car guys that are sports guys that are whatever. But it's a certain topic. So it was one thing I liked about podcasts is that I could especially the ones that are always attracted me to them were ones that were conversations. And that's what for 99 episodes, I was trying to recreate with guests what me and you had. And that's a casual conversation that would go anywhere. And I had this ongoing joke with like James Corbett, like you know, he'll, because he's so knowledgeable with so many topics, I think sometimes he likes to know ahead of time, like, hey, what are we going to talk about, just so I can be somewhat prepared, you know. And I think almost at the end of every show, I apologize for not hitting on any of those topics.
Yeah, that's,
you know,
yeah, but that's what makes this, I mean, the lack of structure, so to speak, of your conversations is what makes it a great thing. And I think, like, all the people, like I said before, I got a dry throat here, but like I said before, you can actually see your guests switch and get into where they stop just blurting out facts and talking points and actually have conversation with you. And I think that's a huge credit to the show.
well, just most recently, Dennis McKenna, and quite a few guests are like, oh, I really like the way you do. I remember the amazing Jonathan saying he loves the way I do my interviews, and I'm like, that's because it's not an interview. That's what I'm thinking to myself. I'm
Really,
like,
that's the difference. This is not an interview format. It's a conversation format.
yeah, which is, I think sometimes it puts pressure on me because I have to, I mean, it's hard. I mean, think about it. Somebody that you talked about going to New Orleans, right? With a group of friends that you've never been together that long. Well, basically almost living together because we're just sleeping in separate beds, but then we're waking up and we're going to breakfast together. We're hanging out all day. You don't know how you're going to connect and if you're going to enjoy each other's company or whatever. Now think of that to the max, because a lot of these guests, I've only interacted with their PR team via email. So now I have to call them at a time, or they call me, and then try to have a connection with them via Skype, not even in person.
Yeah, that's huge.
It's like, I would think about that. I'm like, fuck, man, I would hear other interviews. I'm like, what do I think he liked about that interviewer? Like, or what type, what type of personality do I think he has or likes or gets along with? And I'm like over analyzing things, and I'm driving myself crazy. And a lot of it's for the purpose of trying to capture that sense of a conversation. Like, people would email me and people were like, oh, what time's the interview or whatever, or anytime people refer to it as an interview, a lot of times I'd let it go because I'm like, I'm tired of telling people it's not an interview, it's a conversation. And but sometimes I try to tell them to prepare them, like, hey, it's not going to be a typical show, but it is really hard to, and that's what I like about guests who could be on for, I mean, Dan Carlin was only on for a half an hour. Lee Camp was only on for a half an hour. I remember those really well because those are two early shows that I wish I could do again. And one, I was nervous because it was early in the podcast career and I wasn't quite comfortable yet. And Dan Carlin, obviously historian, super smart guy. And I think I'm much more comfortable now talking to historians than I was then. But
he's the master, though. I mean, you can't.
Yeah.
How do you have Dan Carlin on your podcast and not be I mean, that guy's the man.
He is, and I respect him and like him so much that and I think it definitely showed on the show. So don't go back and listen to that one because it sucked. But if but I wish I had another half an hour, because I know that if I had him for an hour and I wasn't constantly looking at the time, like, should I got to let him go, or should I can't ask any more questions? And I could get to that comfort level. Like, I have my best shows with you, no time limit. Whenever we feel like it's done, it's done.
Probably some
time limit. And like Robbie Martin, when I have him on, he's always done long podcasts with me. And James Corbett, even though he really doesn't do much more than an hour and a half, I love the fact that he'll come on for at least an hour and that gives me enough time. And he's really easy to talk to, so he's probably a bad example. But if it's somebody who it takes a little bit of work for me to get comfortable or them to get comfortable, having more than a half an hour is perfect, because eventually you can only sound professional for so long until you eventually let your guard down and you feel like, okay, it feels like a conversation now, even if they come in mentally feeling like it's going to be an interview, eventually like, oh, this is
you break them down.
Yeah, you break them down. And subconsciously they're like, this really doesn't feel like an interview anymore. And this guy's just ranting and bullshitting and misquoting people. So maybe it's not an interview. And, so I like that. I like that ability. And Joe Rogan talks about it. And I mean, I've brought him up quite a few times at this show. And I think because he was probably my biggest inspiration, because I wanted his format. I love the idea that he had people on for 3 hours, and people would always be like, I mean, the common thing you always heard about guests on the show was they're like, how am I ever going to talk for 3 hours? What are we going to talk? And then at the end of the show, it's like, dude, it's been 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I think that people forget when you're having a conversation, not an interview, but when you're having a conversation, how fast time flies. I mean, we've all done it. We've been at a bar or after, after going out, we'll sit in the car and bullshit. And next thing you know, it's an hour
The
later,
sun
2 hours
is coming up,
the
and I'm
sun,
like, dude, I gotta go.
yeah. And I think that when you're having a conversation and you're enjoying and you're sharing ideas, time does fly. And a lot of podcasts I've done have been like that, where just time flies by and I'm just like, wow, man, that was the quickest hour ever, and so I that's what I try to capture. But it is a little intimidating, this idea that you're hoping to connect with certain guests and you want to be polite. But I also found myself sometimes like, okay, I disagree with them, but I don't want to be an asshole and like be argumentative. But then I'm like, well, you know it doesn't make for a very interesting conversation if I'm not being myself and being like, hey, I kind of disagree with that. This is why. And do you think I'm wrong? And what's your opinion? So there's a lot of things that just because you hit record on a keyboard, or just because that's the other thing. And I mean, I don't know your experience, but how did you feel, or what did you feel was the difference between us having a conversation out at the bar, like I was, and then trying to capture that, like, because that's how I sold you. I'm like, all we're gonna do, Dave, is me and you are gonna have the same conversations we ever have. And that's when I've had friends on, we've had Kevin and Chris, same idea. I'm like, you know what? All we're gonna do is hit record, but we're gonna have the exact same type of conversation we always have. There's gonna be no pressure. There's gonna be nobody expects me to be, or they shouldn't expect me to say anything profound or anything like that. And there's no pressure for that. And if you leave expectations low, then nobody expects much.
That's key.
But there is something about just the fact that it's being recorded that it makes things a little harder. You overanalyze what you say.
I think I know for sure. There's definitely stuff we talk about that I would never talk about on a podcast. I would never want it recorded or out there or anything like that. I mean, your most personal opinions on certain things are reserved for conversations with friends that you trust. And there are definitely, the way things are, there's definitely ways that things can be misheard or misconstrued or turned into something that it's really not.
Yeah, but that's I think, see, this is where I kind of disagree with you, because I feel like, one, I think, and I think we all draw a line somewhere where like, this is too personal. But I like the fact that I feel free to talk about some personal stuff, and I don't ever worry about what people think, because I think I think we all care a little bit, but I think that I try my hardest to just be myself without thinking about how it's going to be analyzed. And I think that giving out personal information, and I don't mean like my house address or phone number, but I mean just talking about personal experiences, people connect with that. Like,
no, I agree with that, but I think more so because of my job that I have to be more
stripper.
I have to be more careful about letting that out there.
Like being a stripper. You don't
now
want
it's out. Now it's over.
Well, luckily you use that rape whistle, so
good thing I don't eat all those zebra cakes. You got
that six-pack. But I agree. But I definitely, one thing luckily I do work a job where I have a little bit more freedom, but sometimes I do think about, like, okay, if I talk about how this company is a bunch of fucking assholes who are just hurting small businesses and whatever, and how cutthroat they are, or if I talk about unions, when we get harassed from unions because we have to hire union guys if we're in a certain town, and we had issues in Pittsfield with that, where here's a perfect example of how unions make zero sense. I'll tell this story really quickly. So people who might not be familiar with the construction industry, if we have a bunch of union workers, right, but then we work in Pittsfield, all these guys are members of like the local unions, like Springfield, Holyoke area. We work up there. They force us to put somebody on our payroll that is from their union hall for the sake of just having somebody in their union hall working for us, because we're in their territory, even though they're all in the labor's union. It's the same union. Perfect example of how it's counterproductive, how something has lost its purpose, has lost its reason for why it exists. At one point, it was about defending employers,
the rights
of the workers, and obviously, there's something called the Ludlow Massacre. Being from Ludlow, Massachusetts, it's actually not. I ran into it because I thought it was about Ludlow, Massachusetts, and it wasn't. It was about Ludlow, Colorado, I believe, and about these workers who were protesting. Then they had like some militia group that got hired who shot a bunch of them and killed a
Wow.
bunch of, but this stuff was actually much more normal than I knew until I looked into this. And that type of stuff happened all the time. And that's why they needed, strength in numbers and to have unions. So it definitely did make sense at some point. But then it gets to a point where greedy people, it becomes counterproductive. But yeah, I think a lot of times we have to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? What's the motivation? Have we lost sight of what's really important and what we're trying to do? And I think, put in simpler terms, I think anytime there's money involved, it doesn't matter if it's the Vatican or a union, there's going to be some greedy motherfuckers who are going to go in there and take advantage of really hardworking, good people. And you saw it with Robert Kennedy and his conflict he had with Jimmy Hoffa. He didn't like the fact that Jimmy Hoffa was taking the money of these hardworking Irish immigrants and then using it for other stuff and pocketing it and all that stuff. So, I mean, you see that. And then and really, I saw growing up as being a Catholic. I saw hardworking construction working, old Portuguese guys who sweat in 90-degree weather like today, bust their balls, worked really hard for the little bit of money that they're making. Then they go to church and throw it in a little basket. And I'm just like, what the fuck are you, like, these people are taking advantage of these people. Like, they're making them believe that putting this money in
Man, you are just all over all the sensitive topics that you said.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, again, I think there should be no boundaries as long as you're willing to talk about it with the open mind.
I'm like, yeah, I kind of curb what I say. Just now you're just like fucking Vatican, blah blah blah, construction, Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah. Well, I just personally, I think for me it was hard because, especially working construction now with my father and seeing how hard he works, and you've seen, everybody has driven by a construction job site. I mean, obviously there's some construction job sites, a bunch of guys doing nothing, but there's, especially doing like what we do, concrete work, there's not really a lot of easy days, and pouring concrete, doing, the type of granite curb, doing curb in the road and stuff like that. It's all ball busting work. So to see this person bust their balls to make a decent living and then just give away their money to a corrupt organization, it's hard. I mean, I felt bad growing up. I remember arguing with my parents about, and you talk about touchy subject. Here's a perfect example of how religion can be a touchy subject. I remember getting a F on my report card. My parents had to talk with me, no big deal. That day that I got the report card, right, I got an F. I'm like, oh, that went over well, not a big deal, right? We're having dinner, and apparently I'm a dumbass who pushed my luck. I end up, I don't know how church got brought up, but I started questioning God and that my parents shouldn't donate money to the church. I got grounded and I'm like, I didn't get grounded for the 2 Fs or whatever I got in my horrible report card. I got
it's 2.
I might have been 2, yeah. And yet, like, if that was the nerve that was touched, and that, to me, that stuck with me because it was like, my parents are brainwashed. And then I'm like, it's not their fault because their parents are brainwashed. and again, like, when your daughter, my son, when they're growing up, if we tell them every single day that the sky is purple, why would they ever believe the sky isn't purple? And why would they ever question that? No different than you said, that little kid who said, who's waving the Confederate flag and says, I'm pro-Trump, and he's 4 years old.
Yeah, that's what he's
brainwashed.
Yeah, it's ingrained.
Or it's like that saying, racism is taught, it's not. Wait, is that, how does it go? It's taught, it's not. Nobody's born racist.
You're that's so true. It is true, without a doubt. It is true. Like, human beings see, as kids, they see other human beings. There's no doubt in my mind. You know what I mean? Like, if there's black kids, white kids, Spanish kids, Asian kids, all in a sandbox together without any outside influence, there's going to be no, it's all going to be equal. It's all going to be fine. When they get older and they see the way their parents treat this race or that race, or say this or say that, that's when they're going to start to pull away.
But isn't that scary? Like, do you ever think about that? How certain things you say, even if we don't think, because I'm sure there's things with you growing up that stuck with you forever.
Yeah.
Didn't seem significant at the moment.
Stupid things too, though.
Like, but don't you think about, like, how I react to this, or how, like, just saying my opinions on a certain issue in front of my kids, like, am I planting a seed?
Yeah,
Like,
of course.
you know,
We always are, though. We always are.
I think it was Brian Callen, a comedian, who said that, you know, we all mess up our kids in one way or another. We just try to do it like with the least harmful way possible. You
Yeah,
know, like we
yeah.
all have, because we're all messed up because our parents messed us up in one way or another. You know, they had flaws and they did their best, and then we try to improve from those flaws. You know, and like a lot of times, like my parents have, there's certain things I disagree with them, the way they do things, or being stubborn, or just the way they raised me that I, you know, wasn't a huge fan of. And I'm like, well, their parents were even like worse to them. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's just, I remember just recently, my mom's like, you know, if I did that, your grandfather would have beat the shit out of me. And I'm like, and my grandfather's an asshole for beating the shit out of his kid.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, so, and then, you know, it puts things in perspective. Like, they're doing the best based on, or they're doing better than the way their parents did it. And I'm hopefully doing better than what they, you know, you take the things that you like and then you improve on it, you know, and that's unfortunately all you can do, you know, and you're influenced by your environment, and, you know, that whole nature versus nurture argument, you know, but I think environment is huge. You know, I think
it's
if
huge.
not,
Definitely.
if it's not maybe the majority, you know, I think I talked about this with Nancy Gabberti. She went into some of the science behind it and stuff like that. And because we got, actually, here's a topic that, you know, you might have opinion on and find interesting, but we were talking about did you listen to the last episode with Nancy Gabberti?
No,
Probably not.
I did listen to the first one.
The first one, yeah.
Well, which I thought was one of your best shows.
Thank you. And so we talked about we talked out of the 5 that I listened to, it was one of your best.
It was in the top 5.
The other 4 I was involved in.
So, honestly, all kidding aside, that was a great show.
Thank you. And so with Nancy Gabberti, one thing that I talked about with her, because she's very knowledgeable about like parenting and all that stuff, and parenting techniques, and she's done a really great job. Her son is Wiz, really smart kid, and like starting businesses already, and he's like in his teens. I don't even know how old this kid is. This kid's like really smart. But we were talking about how everybody always talks about no 2 kids are the same. But if we believe that nurture is more important than, or has a bigger influence than nature, like for example, if I take an American kid, put him in China, raised with Chinese parents, he's gonna speak perfect Chinese, love Chinese food, you know, and vice versa. You know, if you put it to Chinese kid in America. So, you know, it's like when you meet that Chinese guy who looks Chinese and he's like, no, I don't like Chinese food. I'm like, but you look Chinese. How does that make sense? You know, so it's like that type of thing. We have to remember that, like, the way, you know, our environment, where we're raised, ends up having a bigger influence on us than the way we look or the whatever. And we're talking about how like no 2 kids are the same. And I was proposing the idea that parents might neglect the fact, or they might not want to admit that the reason why their 2 kids are different aren't because they're genetically different, but because their parenting style was different with both kids. And I brought up that
there's no doubt about it. I mean, you even said it tonight. Like, you've talked about how you've changed who you are in the period of time. Like, your son is a year and a half. In the last year and a half, you have changed. You've learned from your son on, you know, this. I've done this with my son when he at 6 months and it didn't work, and then I tried this. You're learning how to parent your son.
Oh, absolutely.
Through your son, and all the things that didn't work with him, you can skip. And when your daughter's born, you now have a different attitude, a different set of tools, a different outlook. You're a different person. You'll be 2 years older. Your circumstances are different. You're driving a different car. Your attitude of your comfort with think about how much your life has changed since your son was born, and how really different of a person you're going to be. I mean, essentially the same, but a lot of the things that you believe will remain the same, but a lot of your attitudes about certain things are definitely going to be different.
Well, I mean, just look at also what's different that you can't control. For example, what if your first kid, you're married, the second kid, you're going through a divorce?
Yeah.
You know,
right. All of that stuff, you know,
that all affects the way you parent.
What's your financial stability now? I mean, when did your son was born? Right after you guys moved here, right? I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah, soon after.
You went through. You got married before your son was born. You know, no, your son was there.
He was there. He was my wife's belly.
But all of that was causing stress in your life and uncertainty, and you were going through a lot of huge personal things when he was born, a lot of adjusting. And now look how settled you are. All the crap that you had to buy when you have a brand new kid, like all the safety stuff, all think of just in terms of safety, all the stuff that you had to buy, all the stuff you were told you had to buy and ended up not even needing.
It's marketing bullshit.
All of that stuff is now out the window. All these bizarre, as a parent.
What about the nipples? Just the nipples drive me crazy. Like, oh, there's
so many different
for 3 months. This is a nipple for. I'm like, dude, it's just a bigger hole. I asked my parents, I'm like, what did you guys used to? Oh, we just poked a bigger hole in it, or we poked a second hole in it. I'm like, that makes sense. Why the fuck do I have to buy? But as a parent, you want to do what's right, and you want the best for your kids. So
and then you realize, like, what is the difference between and all those? You have all these irrational fears when your child is born that go away because none of those crazy things that you think are going to happen, you know? And that definitely changes the way you raise a second child. I would imagine. I only have one, but I would imagine that I've learned so much, you know, the first time you do anything. My niece's birthday was yesterday, and my brother bought her a trampoline. We all actually chipped in about her trampoline, and I went over to help build it. And my brother's awful at building anything. So, like, he thinks I'm this building genius. So I go over there and we're building this trampoline. And as we're doing it, I'm like, man, this thing is pretty easy. And I told him, I'm like, dude, the next trampoline we build, which will be never, we'll do it in half the time. Like, once you do something once, it's so much easier the second time, which is the point of that story.
Easier, but
my brother's a good cook, by the way. He's not completely useless because he can't build things. And we talked about that. Because we're laughing about the fact that he can't build anything, and he's like, yeah, I was talking to my wife about that, and she's like, yeah, but Mark, they can't make lasagna like you. So it's kind of funny how, and we're brothers, we have so many things that make us alike, but we're so different in so many ways too, you know?
Yeah.
But clearly my family situation when I was born is far different than my family situation than when my brother was born, you know? So of course we're going to be different.
Were your parents divorced?
No, they were together. But I mean, my mother didn't have a job. Her job was raising us,
being a mom.
And as my youngest brother.
Are you saying being a mom isn't a job?
No, I know. I thought about that.
Insensitive bastard.
That's what I thought about. But
the feminists are emailing it now.
Went out and got a job when my younger brother was
the feminists. I think they'd be mad at you for thinking that women should.
Either way,
somebody will be upset.
See, now because this is live, we can't cut that out. But
I've never cut anything out.
Yeah, I meant a paying job where she received a salary, or
love isn't something worth.
But anyway, things are different, you know.
No, absolutely, and that's one thing I wonder too, because I'm a little afraid. Like, Ricardo was our first child, and like the first anything, it's no different than like your first love.
Dude, I'm the middle. Like,
nobody gives a shit about you.
My parents loved my oldest brother because he was first, and they loved my youngest brother because he was last. And I'm just a middle kid. Like, they left me.
They
places.
Say don't have really.
Yeah, like sometimes they'd forget I was even there.
If we lose one, we still got two. Yeah.
Where's that other one? What's his name?
It's the middle one. That seems like a recurring thing. People are always like, don't have three, have four.
Yeah.
Don't, or either have two or four.
I love being in the middle though, because
you get away with stuff, right?
You're pretty much invisible.
Yeah.
So you do, you get left at bus stops and things like that. But
are you serious?
No, I'm not serious. I had my big brother was the ultimate big brother. He was awesome. So, and he was awful at the same time.
Yeah.
So all the awful things he did to me, I got to do.
You up a little
bit, right?
Yeah,
I got to do that to my little brother, and I learned a lot from my big brother, and I got to share a lot of that with my younger brother.
Did you guys fight a lot? The three of you guys?
Oh yeah, physically, yeah.
Me and my brother used to fight all the time. I remember watching Step Brothers, and I'm like, that is like me.
It's so real.
Because I'm like, I remember. Like me and my brother shared a room for like ever.
The three of us shared a room. And three boys in a room. I can't imagine it, like if this me could go back in time and meet me and I wouldn't even be able to walk in the room. It must have smelled so bad. Like I didn't know, but I wouldn't trade that for anything. Like the goofy stuff we used to do and the memories that I have.
I remember telling my brother, like, we would be like, and it would be real dark. I'm like, listen, once you fall asleep, I'm gonna fucking hit you. You know,
It's so
and
true.
it's we would say this stuff, and you know, and once we think somebody would fall asleep, we'd go over there, punch each other, and I'm like, you mother, and then I'd wait till he fell asleep, and it was
I
bad. And
remember.
my mom would get so upset because she wanted us to get along,
Yeah.
and we wouldn't. We'd fight all. Was your mother like that? She
Yeah, of course they want you to get along, but that's part of life is not getting along. That's how you socially get it through life. Is
I almost feel like the more my
practicing-
mother wanted us to get along, the harder it was for us to
Yeah,
get along.
yeah.
You know, and I kept telling him, like, this is normal. Brothers fight.
Oh,
Like,
you
and not
have to.
But you know what?
But if somebody came after your brother, you would like drop everything between the two of you, and you would take sides with your brother.
Isn't it amazing, like how I feel like we're still like very primitive when it comes down to that, like certain instincts. Like it seems like a person, if somebody tries to fight you or harm you, you could avoid it and you don't
Yeah.
have any problem. But if somebody tries to harm a loved one, all of a sudden this instinct
Yeah,
kicks in.
the stuff that you walk away from for yourself, if it's someone you love, you're like you lose your mind over. Yeah,
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, having a sibling, there's definitely pros and cons to it. I mean, I think having an only child, you know, only child syndrome, but you know, I know people who are only child and are completely normal. You know,
I really think
I
that
know, and I know people who aren't the only child
Yeah.
who have only child syndrome.
I really think it's like if you're like I had an older brother and a younger brother. I have no idea what it would be like to use the bathroom without getting walked in on or disturbed or pushed or you know what I mean? Like I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it's like to be an only child. So what you
And
don't
there's
know, you
social
don't miss.
skills too. I think you learn.
But I think that my daughter's an only child, and I think socially
That's right. Yeah.
she matures faster because she's constantly with adults. So she
Or
really
she's constantly trying to make friends too. Like she's
that too.
she's full-
Yeah.
Because I remember, like, you know, when me and my brother growing up, every time we went somewhere together,
You probably didn't have to make friends because
I didn't. I always knew there's this comfort of going there with at least I know one
Yeah.
person and he's with me. And I remember the first times that like I went to go play basketball, pick up basketball, and I went by myself.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is weird, man. I don't know
My
anybody
daughter
here.
can do stuff that I would never dream of doing. She's been through so much, so much experience at her age.
I bet you she
already.
could hold a microphone in front of her
I
face.
bet you she could too. I bet you she can hold a conversation better, and I bet you she would show up to more podcasts than I do.
Yeah.
You know,
But it is weird because I mean, like having another, and like I was saying, like your first love, that's something. It's not that specific person that you might hold on to. It
It's the
might be special.
experience,
It's
yeah.
experience. It's experience. It's the fact that it was the first person you made love to, or the first person you went to a movie to, first person you really liked, first person.
and all of those things. That's Bruno then for you. That he was your first for all of those things.
No, no. But it was it definitely, and I think that's what you stick to. And I think that with a child, it's similar. Like my second child can never be my first child.
Right.
You know,
right.
and Nancy Gabberti said that, but having a girl, that makes it special in
Yeah,
its
that's
own way.
cool. That's really cool
you
for
know,
you guys.
but I can see how if you had 3 boys, how it might be harder to to feel like every kid's special.
I say to my daughter all the
individually.
time, I'm like, honey, you're my favorite daughter. And she's like, Dad, I'm your only daughter. Like I'm the king of dad jokes. She said that to me today. She's like, you're such a dad. All you do is make dad jokes all the time. But I don't know.
But I think, yeah, I mean, and that's one thing I'm conscious about. I'm kind of afraid that, like, I keep telling myself I have to do, and I've talked to my wife about this. Like, it's really important for us to do our best to all the things that we thought were important with the first. Like, for example, here's a perfect example of what I'm trying to reach with our first child. One thing that I was really anal with was, let's not fight in front of the kid. Let's not fight while you're pregnant. Let's not fight like if after you're pregnant. If we have a confrontation about something, we wait till he's out of the room. We wait till he's with my parents. He's with your
Yeah.
parents. He's whatever, and then we talk about it. I'm like, I don't want him to feel any negative energy, and this is why. Because when I was a kid, I remember my mom being frustrated, and I don't remember specifics. I don't remember any exact detail, but I sense, like, I have this weird memory of her being frustrated all the time. And I remember asking my mother about it, and I'm like, were you I mean, you have twins. I know I can understand how that's frustrating. Like one stops crying, and she's like, absolutely. She's like, I was frustrated all the time. And I'm like, I remember that. Like it was surreal to me, the fact that I remember that. And it's something about like, okay, with kids, you don't think that they're paying attention. You don't think they're absorbing anything. You don't think that they're listening or they sense anything. But it's no different than like a dog who knows when the owner's angry
they
or
pick
happy.
up on that energy.
Energy, social cues like your face. I mean, the way you're moving, or all this stuff. Are you picking things up really quickly and you look angry? So I was really strict with that. And like you hear this with parents all the time. Like there's a lot of things that you're really strict with, like that commercial, for example, when with the first child. I don't even think I even remember the commercial. I think I remember somebody telling me about this commercial. But with the first child, you're really careful with everything. You want everybody to wash their hands before they touch them. And then with the second child, you let the mechanic hold them, And I don't want to do that. Like, and I'm like, well, that's why it's that type of mentality, or that type of I guess parenting, that if you don't stay on top of, like, let me treat both children the same, and find every single interaction just as important with this child as it is with this child. That's why they end up differently. It's like that joke, like if you have two kids going to become a lawyer, one you think is going to need a lawyer. And I remember that joke, and I'm just like, why is that? Why is that the common theme? And
just like we talked in the beginning of the podcast about school, once you're put into a category, that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, where if that's your perception of that person, that's what they become, So I think the key is to not think about it that way. I would think having multiple kids, the hardest thing on kids in a situation like that is to not compare them to each other. Like the biggest source of problems that I see through my job is like, people, like parents that would say, why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you be, like that's a huge source of all kinds of self-hate and stuff like that. So I would think,
and that type of stuff sticks. I think parents sometimes, and this is what we're talking about, there's things that you think your kids aren't absorbing, and they are. Like for example, my mother's notorious for, if I forgot to lock the door once, I will forever be that kid and it's just like, and then it causes this thing where it's just like, now I'm like, I feel like my mom I'm always arguing with my mom about this thing. Like, I'm not a dumbass. I forgot once, and it's and it sticks with you, And I think a lot of times, like you said, like, why can't you be more like your brother? What you're doing is, you don't think, you're just saying these words,
you're
and you
probably
think
saying it to try and inspire someone to get their act together.
But they're taking it as self-hate.
But it's the opposite happens. It has the worst impact.
And how many parents say, without even thinking about it, thinking no more than they're just gonna, like, I'm just thinking out loud, like, why can't you be more like your brother? And that kid, and that's the thing. Like, it's really weird how when you're a kid, like, certain things that adults are like, oh, that's not important, or like your first love, you lose your first love, and your parents are like, oh, you don't know what love is. And then you become an adult. It's like, fuck, man, my parents don't know what love is. Like, I think what I felt with my first love was closer to love than what my parents have now, So it's one of those things where, like, we have to remember that even if as an adult you look back at what your child's going through and it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to you because you live in this adult world where it's like, oh, I have real problems and blah, blah, blah. We have to understand that perception is reality, and they perceive this to be very important. When a kid's getting picked on,
you really don't know what that one thing that when they're sitting in the car thinking, like, what is it? Because I mean, I remember having those moments where I'm, as a kid growing up, thinking about certain things over and over, whatever. You never know when that profound statement is going to come. So you got to be careful about what you say.
Yeah, and you never know when you slip or get angry and you say something, and that phrase, that whatever name calling, that might stick with the kid forever, And again, and it's hard to understand why certain things do and why certain things don't. You know? I recall things growing up that I'm like, why can't I remember this, which is important, but I remember this?
Yeah, that's weird, man. The brain is a weird thing.
But I think subconsciously that there might be a reason for it. There might be something there. It might have had some influence on you in other ways. It might have been more important to you than maybe you tend to believe. I mean, it just, there's a lot of things that we still don't understand about, and that's the thing. Like, that's to go back to my initial thought. Parents want to convince their kid they have everything figured out, and then once you become an adult, you're like, we're all just kids trying to figure it out. We're just older.
No, you're right, and I still don't have it figured out.
Yeah, and I think that's why that type of parenting of asking the questions, willing to hear the other debate with your kids, the other side of the debate. I think that's important because, kids don't listen when you just tell them not to do, do what I say, not what I do.
Right.
Like, I never paid attention to people who said stuff like that. Like, the people who were the most inspiring to me were people who were willing to explain to me why, and willing to be like, people talk about like, oh, once your son gets to the age where he's asking 1,000 questions,
or ask you why. How many people do that? How many people? You know what? I remember when we had Daniele Bolelli on. I remember I asked something, and he says to me, his response was, "Well, what do you think that means?"
Yeah,
and I'm like, "Damn, that's the best. That's a total professor type answer to a question."
which
like,
he is.
Yeah, and then you say it, and then you discuss it. Like, that to me is learning. When you present your perception of something, and then you talk about it, like, I think that's a big deal. Like, that's how you learn. That gives you insight into somebody's mind too. If you say that when your son's older, and you say, well, what do you think of this? Like, I'll say that to Sydney, like, well, what do you think of that? Or what do you think of this? And it really gets you inside their mind, and you can see what their insight is.
And that also tells you that he doesn't believe that he has all the answers.
Right.
Because the big thing is, somebody who is very egotistic and think that they have all the answers, and are very confident with their intelligence and their views on life, would be like, well, you ask him a question like, this is what it is, and this is the answer.
Means. Exactly.
Yeah, and the fact that he was willing to ask us what our opinions were and discuss it and then share his, it tells you that there's wiggle room. There's room to debate this, talk about it, discuss
it makes you feel valued, when you get to express
and that's
your
huge.
opinion
Yeah. I mean, I think, one thing I've learned working construction is there's a lot of retired people who sit around and look like just old retired people, and you talk to them, and they're some of the most interesting people I've ever met. I've met people who, I remember I was like 17, 18 working a job site, and this guy told me he was in the Korean War. I'm like, what the fuck's the Korean War? And then he's like, he's like, that's why it's called the Forgotten War. And all of a sudden I was intrigued with the Korean War. And I'm like, and he was, telling me about his experiences, and like his, talking about just how we've gone involved in foreign policies, and how ridiculous of a war it was, and all this stuff. And, and he had all these really well thought ideas. And I'm like, this guy, I was working, this guy was sitting on his porch watching me. And he looked like just like an old dude that I could have been like, oh, this is an old fart who's just, and then I talked to him, and he had all these interesting experiences and views. And
that's, but his what he shared with you was not what he read in a book. This is experiences. These are things that impacted his life, I'm dying over here.
But I think what also it did, what it also taught me was that you didn't have to be somebody with a plaque on the wall that said you graduate from Harvard to have interesting ideas.
Yeah, you're right.
And one thing I learned from like meeting people like this was that we shouldn't, and there's a word for it too, when you, how do I put this? Basically, your opinion on somebody's intelligence is based on who they are and not what they're saying. So in other words, because this guy is a retired old guy and doesn't have a resume that's impressive or a diploma that's impressive, I act like his opinion's ridiculous or not that intelligent. And then because this person has a resume or a diploma or whatever, written best-selling author, wrote a book, all of a sudden I put their views on this pedestal, like everything they say is profound
based on their resume or their credentials or whatever.
And it's hard to turn that off. It's hard to turn that off, to like, you hear somebody say something, and because of your opinion of that person, you're like, oh yeah, that's a really smart opinion. I agree with him, not because of his ideas, but because of my appreciation of maybe of him, or thinking he's smart or whatever. And I think that's one thing that I've learned from this podcast, and I think it gave me a little bit of motivation and a little bit more confidence to be able to share my ideas, because that's one thing too. Like we talked about analyzing our own words while you're being recorded, and the difference between talking when not recorded and talking when recorded. You start, unfortunately, because I think it's a bad thing, you overanalyze your words, you overanalyze your thoughts, and you don't talk as freely as you do when you're just friends hanging out bullshitting. And I think, you know, it gave me some confidence, because it's like, because a lot of times I'm like, who the fuck am I to share my idea? What makes my ideas interesting? What makes my thoughts interesting? What makes my
That's one of the reasons I don't do this, is like, that's what I feel.
But I remember one of the shows we did, it was me and you, and I had a bunch of, you know, good guests before we did our episode, and you're like, oh, he's gonna want to listen to us, you just had blah 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 and blah blah blah, and then like immediately uploaded it, and like a day or two later I send you up a screenshot. You want to just unhook that and just hold the microphone?
No, I'm just, I don't
because
know
touching it kind of makes a little bit of noise through the headphones.
All right.
But I can feel your hand, or hear your hand. I can't feel your hand. That's kind of weird. But
Do you hear that?
yeah, that's weird. You might not want to do that. But now I lost my train. What the fuck?
You're talking about how
you better come up with
our
this.
shows are shitty, and other people. Why would people want to listen to me talk?
Oh, okay, yeah. So and then I send you a screenshot of how many downloads we got, and I think, you know, the point of doing that was because I understood why, because I was a podcast listener, and I understood why I was enjoyed podcasts and why I was intrigued with them, and my enjoyment in them was the fact that it sounded like people having a conversation, and it didn't matter who they were. I mean, I didn't know who Graham Hancock was before I heard him on a podcast. I didn't know. I mean, this guy wasn't somebody that like I put on this pedestal because he was a best-selling author and he was an intellectual. It was just a dude. It was just an old dude with the ideas, and his ideas were interesting to me. So that was worth listening to, you know. And now I think that's what people liked about our conversations, that it wasn't because we were somebody famous. I mean, if under those guidelines, nobody should be listening to this show. Nobody should even be willing to come on this show, because who the fuck is, you know, who am I to talk to Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who's a Vietnam veteran, or Jesse Ventura, who's a Vietnam veteran? Who am I to talk to him about foreign policy? I've never once served. I've never once been in a room with the highest ranked military people talking about what's going on, you know, but yet they're willing to hear my opinions and share theirs. So I think that, one, that says a lot about the guests, because I think the fact that they're even like, I mean, you could easily look at me and be like, who the fuck is this guy to, you know, to even think that he can hold a conversation about this topic he doesn't know anything about. But I think there is something about the fact that our listeners appreciate the ideas more than they appreciate who's saying them. And when people, and in the same way, I listen to a podcast and I don't care who's saying it. If it's interesting, I mean, Christopher Ryan, when he started his podcast, I listened immediately because I loved him on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I'm like, dude, this author, and Joe Rogan's the one who told him, dude, you should start your own podcast. And I'm like, dude, I love this guy's ideas. He's really interesting. And his way of thinking is really interesting. So I've listened to his podcast since the beginning. And I think that that's what you take for granted. You take for granted that, you know, it's not about who we are and what we've done. It's about the fact that we have ability with the internet for people all over the world to listen to us and hear us bullshit and sometimes be silly, sometimes talk about stuff, but we sound like them. And I think people like that. I think people like the fact that we don't have a resume. We aren't famous for any, I mean, we're not as successful musicians. We're not comedians. Let's be honest. Most people who do podcasts, they're almost all already popular for another reason before they get a podcast.
That's a good point.
You know, they start with a platform. It's either I'm Sam Harris and I'm an author, and now, you know, I start a podcast. I'm Joe Rogan. I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm Daniela Bignelli. I'm an author. You know, I'm a professor. Now I start a podcast. So they start with like a platform. I think what people like about this is the fact that the regular Joes talking the way they would talk, having conversations they would have, and in the same way that, you know, you meet somebody who's just interesting, not interesting because they're a Harvard professor, but interesting because they might work at a convenience store. But there might be really fun, interesting people to talk to. And I think that we can't look at, like you said, diplomas, any of that stuff. None of that stuff represents or defines you. You know, none of that defines you. And I think that there's a lot of people listening to this show who, you know, aren't listening now or might download it later, who their job doesn't define them because they work a job that's unfulfilling, because maybe they've been dealt some shitty cards, because they maybe are in debt or have parents that they didn't get along with and end up living on their own, or haven't got the life together yet, or whatever. Like, that doesn't define you, you know. And we're all capable. 10:10. Was it 10:10?
Yeah, well, it's
10:19.
10:20, but I just
Yeah.
got the text from my daughter, the how much longer text.
Yeah, we'll cut it. But I think that stuff doesn't define you, you know. And I think that, you know, sometimes I joke around about how, like, you know, I'm a fucking construction worker who you know, during the day is floating cement and raking cement, and then at night sometimes I'm talking to people who work the White House, and who am I to be able to do that? But and then it's like, this job doesn't define me.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah,
just,
yeah, you're right.
you know, this job is just something I have to do so I can do the things I want to do. And I think that is what people get from this. I think after 100 episodes, the one thing I'm the most proudest of is I've stayed true to the fact that I said since the beginning, since episode 1, that I believe in the ripple effect. And I think that I believe, and I think that it's also important that people see that if you believe in something and you're passionate about something and you put in, you know, and it's sometimes,
yeah, I mean, it definitely comes out for you when you have your guests on it. Clearly, I mean, this is,
and just the idea of having guests on, like the idea that we were average Joes who started this podcast in this basement with a laptop, and
this
just
isn't a basement. This is a studio.
Yeah, studio. And then it evolved to where we were talking about the guests we've had on, and to be able to look back and be so proud of, like, the people I've had on, and the fact they've really enjoyed themselves on the show. Like, to me, that's a perfect example of how we started our own little ripple. And the fact that I, like, every guest that was on, I had more downloads, I had more countries I was downloaded in. Like, we were making a difference, and we were getting positive feedback, and people were finding enjoyment in this. And, you know, the fact that some person who is in a shitty situation, driving to a job they hate, or maybe living in a country where there's not a lot of opportunities, but they find some enjoyment in hearing us, like, the fact that we can do that is amazing.
Yeah.
And the fact that, again, like I said, we started, you know, with nothing. We started with no platform, and to be able to have these guests, we proved that the ripple effect does exist, and that we can slowly make a difference, and slowly you know, start with something small and create something bigger. And you know, I think that that's an important thing. And I think that, you know, getting to 100 episodes, when we did episode 1, seemed so far away.
Yeah, I think
and
that's
seemed,
awesome, man.
You know,
I think...
it seemed you know, just something that like, I didn't know if I'd ever make it this far, or even if I did, it would be 99 episodes of me and you talking, you know. So I mean, which would have been fine too, because I think that what made this so easy to pursue was that I had zero expectations, because I didn't know what would happen, and I didn't know how far it would go. And so I think the whole thing's been an awesome experience. I can't thank you enough, because honestly, without you, and I know you're laughing, and you're like, you know, you're a modest guy, you don't want to take any credit for anything, but because I didn't know if I was ever going to get any guests on or whatnot, the only way this podcast would be even a little bit possible is having somebody who you think could have these type of conversations. Like, if I didn't have a friend that I'm like, okay, we have conversations that might be worth listening and recording and archiving forever, you know, to me, I'd be screwed. My other option would be ranting for, you know, by myself, which sometimes I already do. But I think that without having a friend like you, I wouldn't be able to. And so that I'm forever thankful, because really, unless I had you, this would never happen.
I definitely appreciate that. And I definitely know that I lost sight of that until I watched the 10-minute video that you just put up when you're testing this. And yeah, I appreciate all the kind things you're saying, but you definitely you only needed that in the beginning, because you definitely have just grown into an awesome thing. And I'm not just the conversation wise, like your your ability to carry a conversation has always been there, but the way you articulate things has improved.
Yeah,
in the 100 episodes. But I wish people could see like all this stuff you have here, like everything from, I mean, I remember when you first started, it was off a laptop, and now you have all of this. Like, you have like an amazing technical setup here. You
Well,
know,
doing
so
music kind of helped a
that's
little bit.
part
Yeah.
2, and part 3 is you are very tenacious when it comes to trying to get guests on. Like you are emailing, texting. Like I can't believe like you're your own engine.
Well, the cool thing is that I've also helped a lot of other people, and I feel like it's the least I can do. Like a lot of guests have been awesome to me, and I think other podcasters have been nice enough to come on my show. I've helped a lot of other people get
Yeah.
guests on, and I completely have no problem doing it. I mean, Boki Nakbar was on my show, the guy who played in the NBA. I helped him get Dan Carlin on the show. You know, got him his information. He actually either him or Daniele Vignelli wanted to, or maybe both. And then he gave me a shout out on his show. I remember having Jen Briney on my show, and we ended up bringing up Jack Abramoff. She's like, "You had Jack Abramoff on your show?" Another person who's pretty crazy. The fact that I had him on.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
and I'm like, yeah, and she's like, oh my god. I'm like, you would have a great conversation with him. Let me get you his information, and I'm like, you should, see if you can get him on. I'm like, he would make
Good, the Fastlane Daily guy that we met down in New Orleans.
Well, he wasn't on
gotta
yet,
be-
but he's gonna
That's
be
got to
on.
be coming up, and that was awesome to see the clip with your ripple effect.
Yeah, if people didn't check that out, when we were in New Orleans, which on a future episode, me and Dave will have to talk more about, because it was just a fun city, awesome experience. Anybody who's from the South, anybody's from New Orleans who's listening, we love your city. You guys are awesome. People from there are super nice, and I have nothing but nice things to say about people from New Orleans. But yeah, so Derek D from Fastlane Daily, awesome show. If you're into cars, he's actually super funny too. I think that's what makes this show so successful, is the fact that he has a great sense of humor and talks about car news and cars, but makes you laugh at the same time, and it's super silly. Me and my brother, my brother spotted him, and he's like, "Yo, is that Derek D from Fastlane Daily?" I'm like, "Yeah, dude, that's him." And then he's like, "Dude, should we go up to him?" I'm like, "Fuck yeah, we should." And then it didn't hit me until after I went up to him that Bruno was like, because my brother was like, oh, dude, he's like, I wasn't even gonna go up to him. I felt like an asshole going up to him, bothering him. And then I hit me. I'm like, I'm like, I'm not known to have that type of confidence to go up to somebody. I'm like, it's a fucking podcast, because I'm comfortable now talking to people who are somewhat famous, and I didn't even think about it. I'm like I almost felt like, oh, maybe he's right, but then I'm like, I didn't even think about it. I'm just like, I just went up to him, and so then he ended up giving us a shout out on his show. And on one of the episodes, I ended up sharing it on our Facebook page and on Twitter.
That was cool.
But and he showed a picture of him and my brother. I took a picture of them hugging her or something like that. And he gave a shout out to the podcast, and he's going to be on hopefully very soon too. So, but it's cool to do stuff like that, and it's cool just to be like, meet other podcasters, and like super friendly. The guy offered to come on my show. He's like, oh, maybe I'll have you on my show.
That's awesome, man.
And it's a really cool community. It seems like people who, and I told you should be on the show, and I know, oh, I'm not a car guy, but but anyway, so it's a cool community where because everybody who does it is just passionate about it. We don't feel like somebody's a threat or anything like that. We help each other out. Like I said, I helped Jen Briney get Jack Abramoff, and there's been other guests. I think Robbie Martin got Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson on his show with Abby Martins, him and Media Roots. I know that was soon after I recommended having them on and forwarded some information. But all those people have done the same for me. They, first of all, just coming on my show was already good enough where I'm like, I feel like I owe them a favor. So anytime I can help it's a cool community. Because most of us are doing this because we love it, because it's an awful investment, which sometimes makes it hard to continue, because you do have to pay, every year for bandwidth, for storage, for the reason why you can get it on iTunes, Stitcher, every single phone app out there is because, we pay for that service, so it makes it an awful investment because I'm making zero money. I've always got people who are like, oh, why don't you put advertising and sponsorships? And I'm like, because I have a full-time job. Unless I'm getting enough downloads where I could literally quit my full-time job or make it a part-time job, to me, it's not worth annoying my fans with doing advertisements and stuff like that. When we first started the show, I used to do intros while the guest was on the line, and I sucked at them. And I realized anytime I was trying to be professional, I was horrendous. That's why now I do the intros afterwards, where I think
that's an awesome improvement. Yeah, that's an awesome improvement.
We've been through some changes. I mean, I also went through, I forget how many episodes where I'm like, oh, let me do something different at the end of every, because a lot of London Real, Cara Santa Maria, like there's a lot of shows where they do like a final question, you know, when they leave the show. And so I tried doing that too. I did like 5 questions and then for every guest before at the end of a show. And then after a while, like one episode I forgot, and then another episode, like they had to go, and I like tried to squeeze it in, and it was just like, dude, this is a lot of work. And I'm like, and this isn't me. Like I'm even though it was
your format is no format.
Yeah, no. Is anybody done? Oh, somebody saw behind the curtains now. But yeah, the format is no format, that's,
wow, the ghost.
But yeah, so I think that's what people like, and throughout the whole. So it's not funny for people who don't know what we're talking about.
This studio is haunted
by a Portuguese ghost, João Gomes.
Who died making wine.
He did. He drowned. He drowned with a smile on his face.
He died happy.
But so I guess to end this all off, thanks everybody for listening. From the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate the idea. I think for Dave, it still sounds crazy. The idea that anybody would want to spend time downloading this and listening to us talk. Like I don't even listen to it. But I think that well, you don't have to, because we're a part of these conversations when we have them. But so I think thank you so much, everybody. I've had 99% awesome feedback. Everybody who tweets me about certain episodes they like, or they appreciate certain things. All the guests. I mean, I couldn't do this without all the guests. I feel like I'm doing a fucking Oscar speech.
This is great, though. It's 100 episodes, man. It's a big milestone.
Yeah, it is.
And I'm proud to have been part of it. And like I said, you've done an awesome job with all this.
Hopefully, you're a part of some more.
I'll be here for number 200. Who knows what the technology will be that'll draw me out of retirement at 200?
Yeah, that's true. So it's been fun. It's been fun growing with the listeners. And so if you guys like the show, please rate the show on iTunes, all that stuff. I get much more downloads. That's one thing that's really hard. Every podcaster has an issue with having way more downloads than people actually like rating the show on iTunes or anything like that. Because I think, like me, I listen to tons of shows and I never rate on iTunes. I just download it. I don't bother. But it does help with more people finding it. Also, share the show if you like it, any certain episodes, stuff like that. Those little things go a long way. I share things sometimes that I don't think sometimes I told Gina, my wife, I'm like, we could share a picture of us and get 1,000 likes in a second. If I share the cure to cancer, it'd be ignored by everybody, you know?
Yeah.
And it's amazing the things that get hits. But a lot of times I'll share something and people be like, hey, I saw that video you shared. I'm like, well, why the fuck didn't you like it? Why didn't you share it? You know?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where I think sometimes just doing something as simple as retweeting something or sharing something, you might expose some people to it and create some new fans, or at least just share a really interesting thought or idea or video or documentary or whatever. And I think that even if people aren't liking it or whatever, some people are seeing it, and you're still reaching people. So if people can do that too, that'd be awesome. And let's see what happens in another 100 episodes. I mean, I'm really curious to see where this thing goes. I don't know if I want to change anything, to be honest. I mean, I like the way it is. I'm kind of a creature of habit, like most of us, and you know, the way I look at it is maybe improve the studio, maybe eventually do some housework down here, put some sheetrock and make it look a little nicer, get some nicer chairs and stuff.
Dude, who cares, man? Nobody has any idea what's going on in here. Nobody knows.
Yeah, and which is nice. I kind of like the basement look, you know, because my wife kind of busted my balls about, oh, you know, like you should do the tile over and then do the and I'm like, but why? I'm like, I like the fact when I'm down here, I feel like I'm in a basement, and it kind of makes me feel comfortable. Like, it doesn't look too professional, you know. It just, like, if it was too professional where it looked like an office, I'd be in anxiety because I feel like, oh, am I at work? You know, so it kind of has that like really kind of laid back feel. So thanks again, guys. Keep downloading, and I'll see you on the next one, guys. I really appreciate it. We have a bunch of guests on their way now that we got 100 out of the way, with my hardest to book guest, Dave, who is literally, you're the hardest person. I think Jesse Ventura is more likely to do another episode than you.
Oh.
But I see your reasons why. Well, actually, I don't.
Good times. But I'm glad I showed up for 100.
Thanks, guys, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Thanks.